Hello, everyone, and welcome to a different discussion. This is a discussion about Avatar: The Last Airbender, the live action season one. And it's me, Ty from Wit and Folly, and I'm here to discuss this with you today with Marie Claire.
Hi,
So say
everyone.
hi. Yay! And I know this is a different format from what I usually do. If you're familiar with Marie Claire and I covered F4 Thailand together, and we did this kind of format, which is sort of a podcast with a PowerPoint. So you can just listen to this wherever you're at, or you can put up the visuals if you want. We're going to have a lot of visuals. It's going to be really fun. But this is just a discussion format, and we're going to talk about a lot of stuff from symbolic and meta point of view, a lot of metaphor, themes, archetypes, the kind of stuff that we love to do. If you're familiar with my channel, Wit and Folly, that I do a lot of video essays, discuss a lot of this kind of stuff. Marie Claire, why don't you tell them about what you do on your channel and your podcast?
Yeah, so I primarily talk about Star Wars on What the Force, which is primarily a podcast, although I have done the occasional video. And I talk about Star Wars from a meta mythical and thematic and symbolism perspective primarily. And then I also have another channel called What the Fiction, which I talk about kind of anything I want to. And I do way more videos for that on a lot of symbolism and, again, these mythical archetypes, especially that present themselves in story that really tell us why we love these stories and what they
Yeah.
mean.
Yeah, and Marie Claire and I have collaborated on a lot of projects in the past. So I assume a lot of people
Just
are
over
going to
6
be,
years.
yeah, that's crazy. That blows my mind. Yeah, I assume a lot of people that are tuning in will have heard, us on other projects or perhaps together on other projects. But if you don't, then we're gonna provide a lot of background in this as well. So maybe it's a refresher for some of you, but maybe it's your first time listening to it. And either way, we're excited to be talking about it again because we just love talking about this sort of stuff. So let's dig into what it is we're talking about. This is, Avatar: The Last Airbender. I think Marie Claire and I both have seen the original many, many
Hmm.
times, and we both have a history with it. We didn't know, I think for both of us, we didn't really know how to approach the live action. We weren't sure if it was, going to live up or what it was going to do differently. And it was so exciting to see it kind of take a lot of liberties and do some new things. So we wanted to talk about why we like that and what is like the purpose of an adaptation. And yeah, go ahead. Like, how did you feel going into it? And what do you want to say about kind of transformative storytelling? And
Oh,
this is
wow.
kind of stuff
Okay.
we love.
Yeah, this is stuff we loved. Like, we always love to use the F4 context in
Mhm.
explaining why we love adaptations so much. So, Hanayori Dango, which is the cornerstone of shoujo mangas in Japan slash all of like the Asian countries, really, as far
Yes.
as how important it is a manga that was produced in the 90s, kind of had a full run and has been officially adapted 7 times
Mhm.
in different countries throughout, like, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, China,
Yeah.
Thailand,
Yeah.
multiple different ways. There's a cartoon, and adaptations themselves, when it comes to things of the bygone past, we think about Shakespeare, we think about, um, Lord of the Rings even, we think about, you know, Jane Austen. We never balk at having an adaptation show up of something that is considered to be classic, but we
Yeah.
tend to balk at things that are more recent that we don't feel maybe they're still in our memory, right? Like for me and you, we both watched the cartoon, and so it tends to have a more visceral reaction, like, why does this need to be remade? I actually have a great quote, which is
Yeah.
adaptation is primarily a phenomenon of recontextualization of a text, or even better, the reformalization of the communication situation. And this is Cassetti, and they've done research on sort of adaptations and why we do them.
Yeah.
This is like a study. And so the importance of it is that we need to have some sort of fidelity with the truth of the story in it, but we also need to have it scaffolded into new meaning somehow. And that's when you have a successful adaptation. And successful adaptations say something new about the thematic truths of the story and pull in new audience. That is the only measure
Hmm.
of a successful adaptation that we know of.
Yeah, yeah, those two things, which is uh obviously from our perspective, Avatar The Last Airbender live action does both of those things uh very well. It's so interesting, and to go back to what you said about the Shakespeare, I just did something recently on Thunderquack podcast on Michael's Perfect 10
Hmm.
podcast, and we talked about 10 things I hate about you, and
Nice.
we talked
Classic.
about, yeah, all the classic stuff, and then also talked about other Heath Ledger works that he was in, other movies that he was in. He was in a lot of adaptations, and we talked about that from like a mythopoetic point of view, what that means for these different characters that he played and how they were really similar. They had similar character arcs. And that is a really, for, for where we're coming from, in terms of transformative storytelling, which is all about trying to find something that was already there in the original story, but to pull that out and give the original story even more meaning than it had in its original iteration. That's really exciting. Uh,
Hmm.
Another thing that is so important to know about this particular live action is that originally it was written by, you know, white guys mostly, and
Yeah.
it was written from a Western point of view. They were appropriating Asian ideas from all over different parts of Asia. Lots. It was kind of this amalgamation of all these different concepts and religions.
Not
Uh,
unlike George Lucas.
True. Yeah. Very, very. This is very Star Wars. I mean, we
Hmm.
could just come from that perspective and have a whole podcast episode to talk about that. But yeah, it's taking all these ideas and kind of putting them all together and allowing it to speak through them. I mean, clearly it's inspired. It touched a lot of people. It impacted a lot of people's lives. And that is now being moved to a predominantly Asian diaspora creators,
Hmm.
people who are a part of this group that might not speak languages of those areas, or they might not necessarily practice those religions, but they are from those areas within their culture, within their ethnicity, within their families, and now they have control of the story, and that is
Hmm.
so interesting because they're going to have something to say that the original creators didn't have, but they're also, because they like the story, because they're also fans, and they feel like they have something new to add to this that makes the original story more meaningful and more impactful for the next group of people who are exposed to it. I think that's like really cool, and it gives even more of a justification for why this should be adapted.
Adapted. Yeah, it really does, and it sort of reminds me of um something I recently got to hear Ken Liu talk about his experience as a writer, and he and a kid in the audience actually asked him about translating Three Body Problem, which translation is not his passion, but he has previously done a lot of translations for like friends of his who are primarily only Chinese
Mhm.
speaking and writing. And so he translated Three Body Problem, which is now being made into an Netflix adaptation as well.
Mhm.
And he said that the difference between writing on your own and translating is like the difference between writing music and performing music.
Right.
And especially when you think about creating like a new cover of a song, and
Mhm.
what makes a successful cover or a successful um like arrangement of a new
Mhm.
song, right? So
Mhm.
when you're arranging it differently, you're making the choices on the different emphasis of the music itself. And it can emphasize different parts of the song that are important, but also it can um sort of speak to a new audience and bring people into
Mhm.
the story. It's sort of
Mhm.
like the difference between Tracy Chapman's Fast Car and the more
Yeah.
modern version of it. It brought new people into listening to
The old one. The
like the
original.
original.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I fully foresee people going back and like watching the cartoon because they
Oh, yeah.
enjoyed this
Mhm.
live action adaptation.
Oh yeah, you get a sense of it's that energy, when you get inspired by something is to want to consume things that are related. And yeah, the old one is right there. And then you also have the comics and you see a lot of that people are diving into after seeing the live action for the first time. And I wanted to talk briefly about uh ships and the kind of the adaptation kind of realm and what it means in transformative storytelling because transformative storytelling, that particular phrase comes from the Society of Transformative Works, the people that run Archive of Our Own, and what they're trying to promote and maintain is creative fan works, fan fiction, fan art, all of that. This is all about taking something that we love and doing something new with it and protecting that creative ability is really important. And that extends to shipping, of course, because shipping is something that people are very passionate about. And I think we wanted to just kind of cover it really quickly because it is so important to so many people. And I don't have a really strong opinion when it comes to ships. I
Mm.
for this show, I do generally, but I don't when it comes to this show for some reason. So it's not my like sole thing, but I love seeing the creative part in fandom talking about ships. I love the arguments that people have when they're
Mhm.
productive, and I love the art, and I love seeing all different kinds of ships, the canon ones, the crack ones, the everything in between. I think it's so interesting and fun, and it's a way to flip characters in a different way and see them from a
Yeah.
different perspective.
I've always viewed shipping as like the fantasy football of fictional experience. And shipping fan works like fanfic, fan art, fan movies, all of that is also associated with paratext of the text,
Mhm.
which is that it can increase the influence of the text itself by having fan engagement in transformation and creating their own versions of reality on top of it.
Mhm.
Not only does having interviews with the cast and creators and articles that come out, but also fan works create more influence associated with the adaptation. And in some ways, the best measure of the success of an adaptation is if there is fan works created from it, because
Yeah.
it has jived. And those could be as simple as like video edits to music, like fan vids.
Yep. Yep. I make
If
some of those sometimes.
yeah, if people are engaging with the media in this way, it means that they've connected with it in a
Yeah.
large way. And if they're doing their like they're putting in effort
Mhm.
to create something new out of it, it means it has been successfully as influential
Yeah.
as it needs to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so it's really exciting to see. It's definitely this particular adaptation is going to give us more content. It's going to give us more
Hmm.
stuff, like not just in a visual sense, like we get to see these live action characters
Hmm.
interact, but also in a symbolic sense. And I think you talked about this before we started recording, what this particular story gives us and how it inspires for characters that don't necessarily even interact, right?
Hmm. Yeah, it's
Because yeah.
because it's so plugged into mythical motifs with elements and with like opposites, which are very, very powerful
Mhm,
inside of storytelling in general, especially from a psychological perspective. We'll go into that later on.
mhm.
It's going to create realms of um symbolic association, even
Yes.
if characters actually don't talk to one another.
Yeah.
And so, quite literally, like Zuko and Katara, I don't think ever talk until their end fight. They are in space together. He almost grabs her that one time, and like he maybe sees her in the water village, like the Southern Water Tribe.
Mhm.
But until their fight, they actually don't interact. And it's
Yeah.
like people are like already on top of the shipping. And it's because of the symbolic relationship between the
Mhm.
struggle of oppressor oppressed, water, fire,
Fire, yeah.
right? And
Yep.
hurt healer. There's a
Yes.
lot of things that just plug into the collective unconscious. As humans, we want to make the oppositionally opposed smushed together to create balance and unity. We
Yeah.
want this to happen because of how powerful it can be uh, from a subconscious perspective for ourselves.
Yeah, from a psychological point of view, to be able to kind of merge these different parts of ourselves together on such
Mhm.
opposite ends, it is such a healing and helpful practice
Yeah,
psychologically.
and when we experience this successfully in fiction,
Mhm.
we experience an apotheosis in ourselves. When
Yes.
we are able to witness it, we are able to put disparate pieces of ourselves back together, and we actually
Mhm.
start to crave it from a story perspective. If
Mhm.
it's done successfully, we want to see it done again.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and that's like, and even the the canon ships do something that it's not quite that, but they also do their own thing, and I think we'll talk about it a
Hmm.
little bit as we talk through this discussion about archetypes and whatnot. But there is, in weirdly enough, in this particular show, in this story, in the canon story that's presented with the original, which we think they're going to probably follow the same
I don't get the
basic.
impression that they're going to change
Right.
from the canon story.
Exactly. I don't think so either.
Yeah.
We could be wrong,
I
but
I know why they made choices they made this season now that I've looked at the
Mhm,
archetypes throughout the season. It's just because primarily Aang
mhm.
doesn't leave a stage until later on, and
Yeah.
that presents a challenge for actually telling a more grown-up story for him in the first season. Whereas I
Right,
would say
right.
that the cartoon is more muddy from
Mhm.
an archetype perspective for him early on.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're gonna get into that, like, super detailed, which I'm so excited about. But yeah, it's definitely worthwhile, I think, to say that, like, all ships are really interesting from a meta
Mhm.
perspective, from a symbolic perspective. Exploring it is always helpful and fruitful and interesting, no matter where you're coming from. I think that's how it is. Honestly, I've seen so many crack ships that I'm just like, yes, I am on board with Aang and Azula. Hell yeah, I'm on board with Aang and
Aang
Azula.
and Azula. Yeah. You know what? And if you love it, write it and maybe
Yeah.
you'll be published and it'll be create a world of its own
Right.
that will actually work out the way that you want it to work out, and it will resonate with the people that also saw it, and
Yeah.
it will be out there. Write it.
Yeah, exactly. Write it. Yeah, it's the Raylo fandom taught us anything. It's that. All right, so let's
Be
get
the change you want to
into
be in the world.
be the change. Yeah, exactly. Oddly enough, a big theme of what we're going to talk about, I'm sure. But yeah, so let's talk about some basic stuff. I say basic stuff. I mean, it's not even basic to me. It's still incredibly complex. But yeah, we're going to talk about some things we've talked about before on in our collaborative projects, but also individually talked about these concepts. Something that I'm really interested in that I continue to delve into is alchemy. In alchemy, there are obviously the four elements are there. On the far left image, you see the four women standing on these kind of like sphere objects that have symbols, and on top of their heads is a different sort of symbol that's more animalistic. And these are the four elements in alchemy, and it's earth, water, fire, air. It's the same elements that we have in the show. And then in the middle, we have kind of the four transitory parts of uh alchemy, but getting to make like the philosopher's stone.
Mm.
It's sort of the recipe of eternal life. This is also related to concepts like the Holy Grail. If you're more familiar with like the Holy Grail stories, it is a symbolic representation of transcendence and going beyond the physical form of life. It's finding some sort of everlasting uh element or physical substance. And these four things, and I'm not going to go into super detail with this, but this is the middle image that I'm talking about. These four things also are very similar to the elements, the four elements, but they're also really similar to the chakras and the fact that they go from the bottom up. It's a process. And that's what brings us to the far right image with the chakras, which are also seen as, I think because in alchemy, it's more seen as a sphere, but chakras are wheels.
Mm-hmm.
So they spin, and they can spin inward, they can spin outward, depending on what you're trying to do in your internal practice. But generally, they're considered wheels, are considered lotuses is another symbol that they have. But you can see just visually, all of these things are very much representing similar concepts about what happens to us when we kind of separate all these things out within ourselves and make sense of them individually and then try to put them all back together. They're all telling the same story. So,
and when you step back and you view like the Joseph Campbellian hero's journey, it also tells
the
the
same.
alchemy retell like
Yeah.
nation. It also tells the chakras and how they go through the different cycles.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just using different words and different metaphors.
It is. And you can, from an anthropological perspective, see why they use different symbols, metaphors, slightly different. But generally they're really, really similar because ultimately they're all telling the same story of the life, death, rebirth cycle. And that's something to keep in mind because that's obviously incredibly related to the avatar and what the avatar represents.
Mm-hmm.
But to just kind of briefly pull in something kind of fun is the Chinese uh, Chinese alchemy is really interesting because it uses fire, earth, water, metal, and wood. Those are the five elements of Chinese alchemy, and they're all related to each other through the interaction that they generate and then the ability for that element to overcome a different one. And
Mm-hmm.
if you can see it on the screen right now, this is kind of the pattern that it makes. It makes a star pattern. It also makes a circle. So that's very interesting if you're interested in kind of the hero's journey wheel, or even in Hinduism and Buddhism, like the wheels
Mm-hmm.
and the chakras, everything is circulating, everything is moving.
Cycles. Yeah.
Cycles, yeah. And there
Never
are
ending.
elements of, yeah, yeah, and there are elements of overcoming and generation and transferings of energy. All of that is within this particular Chinese alchemy. And also on the right, we have the what is it, the wheel of life.
The
There,
wheel of reincarnation.
right, the wheel of
Yeah. And
reincarnation.
you can only escape it by transcending the wheel, the
Yes,
the cycle of reincarnation.
right. And typically
And
with,
you get that through enlightenment.
yes, you get that through enlightenment. The wheel is usually representative of the things that exist within the physical realm, and then there's usually obviously the monster that's holding the wheel is representative of death, to kind of be there as saying that this will always end in death. But the wheel represents the reincarnation cycle of this. And then also there's typically, not in this particular image, but usually in these images you have like a symbolic representation of the Buddha pointing to a moon in the corner, and that's supposed to signify the way out of the cycle, which is transcendence. And that is a way to live within the world where you are not suffering. It is the way out of suffering. So let's get into the elements, because like they mean so much, but they're also so incredibly intermingled. Like
Mm-hmm.
there are so many explanations for like why characters are the way they are, just based on like the elements that they're tied to, but also the way they interact with other people, or like the bending that's difficult for Aang versus, you know, even into Korra and whatnot. And this all comes down to like what these things mean. What you'll see on your screen is a typically in with chakras, we have a symbol, which for Earth, we'll start with Earth, it's placed at the very, very bottom um, of your alignment. And that's going to be like
Sort of
typically
goes up your
below.
spine, sort
Yeah,
of.
it's like at the
Yeah.
base of your spine. Yeah, so that's where you sit. That's where you kind of are one with the Earth. That's why it's Earth.
Mm-hmm.
But each chakra is not only, like we said, a wheel, but it's also a lotus. So they're different. There are different petals of the lotus. I do want to say like that the color system is not something that is ancient. It's not something that's typically attributed to the chakras. And the color system was added by new age thought in like the 1970s. So don't get hung up on the colors. It doesn't mean anything. It's just a way to represent the transition from the bottom to the top. And that was an easy way to, you know, communicate that was through rainbow. We have the elemental like alchemy symbol on the far left for Earth. As you can see, it's like a triangle that's like sitting in this line, which is the Earth that's pointing down. You also get like symbolism with triangles of whether or not it's a masculine principle versus a feminine principle. This one is more of a feminine principle because of the way that the triangle is positioned. Campbell likes to think of this chakra as a dragon that is defending its treasure, because a dragon exists from the earth. It's of the earth, and it's very instinctual. It's focused on guarding its treasure. And in this case, its treasure is the next chakra,
Mm.
which is water. And that chakra is representative. That's the sex organs. So of course the dragon is, protecting virginity,
Mm.
if you want to look at it that way, because dragons protect virgins, or they eat virgins in some cases.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's like it's protecting this particular chakra. And this chakra, you'll see you have the symbol, the lotus symbol for this one. This is a very feminine symbol in alchemy. It's not put into anything, it's open, it's by itself, it's just an upside down triangle that's representative of the uterus. And also another symbol that's associated with water is the moon, which is clearly a big, big part of
The show
Avatar.
and the
Yeah.
internal mythopoeic mythology.
Yeah. And I should have mentioned with Earth, obviously like the Earth nations typically are walled, they're guarded, they are
Mhm.
very defense focused, and they're also very wealthy. And dragons, dragons protecting
Mhm.
gold. The Earth Kingdom is very wealthy. They protect their people, they protect their wealth.
And the benders
Um,
themselves often don't wear shoes so that they're in connection with the ground at all
yeah.
times.
Oh yeah, and there's some stuff in yoga in the yoga practice that is associated with that as well, especially in Hinduism that I'll talk about as well. Touching of the ground. But yeah, so water also representative of the tides of life, the ebbs and flows, comes and goes, the excitement of life, the erotic love. All of these things are connected to the water chakra. And then the next one is fire. They do really, really good job, I think, in the OG Avatar, the original cartoon, and they pretty much got fire. They like, yeah, I understand this. It's very much a masculine principle. It
Mhm.
sits at the stomach, it consumes, it burns, like just like
Mhm.
your stomach, digests your food you're consuming, and it burns away those things, and it creates that energy so that you can function. That's fire. That is the consuming principle of your body. And it's also, obviously the sun is a big symbol in the show, but it's also a Campbell talks about this inertia that fire, that this particular fire chakra like kind of gives you, and
Mhm.
that you are now moving up the chakra ladder. And once you reach this particular part, this particular chakra, you have inertia to keep going. You are now on the journey.
Mhm.
You're now being pushed through the rest of the way, because after you leave the fire chakra, you are leaving the
Substantial.
confines. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
leaving the confines of the body. You're now going
Mhm.
up into spirit. So then we'll just air, the air chakra is in the heart. This is so, I think this is why it's so difficult for a lot of people, me included, growing up with the original Avatar show, to separate air benders from the Avatar. Like,
Mm.
I don't see a lot of people talking about this, but I know it exists because I've seen people stumble over themselves in certain arguments. Um, the air chakra is in the heart. It's like kind of the beginning of spiraling outward. And it's, it obviously they made the airbenders monks, and they made them very focused on all of the things that are representative of air. It's a masculine
Mhm.
principle, but it's a stable masculine principle. It's more, it doesn't consume, it's not like fire, and then it just uh it's not unwieldy.
Mm.
It is kind of focused. And also the way that Campbell talks about air is that it's basically a a baby deer, a wide-eyed baby deer, an innocent baby deer. I thought that was so funny.
Ooh.
You have like water is the moon and fire is the sun, but air is a baby deer, and earth is a guarding dragon. It doesn't seem like it should be that. I know there are other symbols. I did want to focus on these though, because I think it's interesting for the
Mhm.
show, because Aang is presented as like this very innocent, childlike
Yep.
person. So yeah, so other things about air is that once you get to this particular chakra in your journey, that consuming power that you built up in the fire chakra begins to turn back on yourself. And it's about awareness. It's about opening up this awareness of leaving the physical part of yourself. And also that opens you up to being vulnerable. And that's about, that's a part of the innocence of it. It's a vulnerability. And it's also providing you the ability to see beyond binaries.
Mhm.
It's a creative energy. And it's also where Om sits. It's where like your lungs are there at your heart chakra. That's where your breath is made. That's where the energy of your breath comes from. And that's where the word Om, when people sit down to meditate and they say Om, that's where Om comes from, which is considered, very, very important in yoga practices. So the next three, I won't spend a ton of time on this, are if you see on the right, so the first four are obviously the four main elements that we covered, and those are indicative of like the body. They're very much a part of the body. They're substantial. But then once you get into 5, you're getting into more higher concepts about what is the self. And you can see this start taking the form of like this hero's journey, right? Because 5 is the aether or just space. But it's the throat. And this is where the sound actually comes out. This is where you are declaring who you are, what you believe, all these things that come out of you. And then the 6th chakra is the third eye. This is when you start realizing not only your individual self, but you start realizing the individuality of others. And then beyond that is what at least Campbell called the great bliss, but it's also considered like the crown, the lotus, the ultimate lotus, and just generally like transcendence and reaching enlightenment is what you'll see most people refer to that one as. And this a whole journey, this is about the transfer of energy from the bottom to the top. It's a journey of individuation, which is something you mentioned before, but it's Campbell likes to talk about it as like the serpent is going to take this journey from the bottom to the top of the head, which is the lotus, and it's a marriage of the serpent and the lotus. So if you're familiar with the serpent in archaic mythology, like this is a really, really big symbol. If you're familiar with life trees, basically the body here is a life tree and it's being guarded by the snake, and the snake takes that journey to the top of the tree, which is the lotus, the flower. And that is just solving these things, bringing these opposites together. And in a different way of looking at it, Campbell talks about when you start at the air chakra at the center of your heart, you can begin to kind of spiral outwards. So that goes, if you see the middle image here, it starts with 4 in the middle, and then it goes to 3 to 5 to 2 to 6, and then it'll keep going, right? And those energies, because they're opposites, they will transfer a large amount of energy to each other. So 4 is air, and then 3 is your stomach, and then but 5 is where your voice comes from. So your stomach, the energy that you kind of hold within your consumption, within your fuel for your body, your digestion, goes into your ability to speak about things, just as your the number 2 chakra, the water chakra, that more excitement about life and erotic love goes into your ability to understand other people. That's the third eye. So these energies feed into each other, and they can spin inward and they can spin outward. And that affects the way that you interact with the world, but it also affects the way that you see yourself. Because it can be an inward journey, it can be an outward journey. There's a lot of different ways to look at this. But that's basically, that's like, chakras and yogas 101, as much as I possibly could summarize it. But I definitely wanted to cover it because I think, from a Campbellian point of view, this is a hero's journey. Moving through the chakras is a hero's journey. It's just another cyclical journey, ones that we've covered so many times. Added a little image of Aang here because obviously we know this is like super important to his journey and his meditations. It's how he communicates with the other avatars is through meditation. So here's just quickly, because the word avatar is always kind of a strange one, especially when it comes to Hinduism. But we have another image of the wheel of life on the left, and this one actually does have the Buddha pointing to the moon in it, which is I mentioned is about transcendence and breaking from the wheel of suffering. So the avatar, like what it means in Hinduism, is that it's not an incarnation, it's not just a reincarnation. It is the gods taking a different form within the physical realm in order to complete a task to bring Dharma back to the world. And this is just, you can just think of Dharma as balance, harmony. And this is a little different, obviously, than what the show brings. The show is mostly using incarnations. Uh, but in Hindu practice, it's
Purposeful?
a little more purposeful. Yeah, because it's like it's saying that this particular version of this god is here to solve this very specific problem, and that's why they have to take the form of a fish or an
Mhm.
archer or something like that. So
What I find super fascinating is that because it draws on many traditions that involve reincarnation from Asian traditions, it will actually sort of butt head to head with some of the Western archetypical influences that
mhm,
are happening in the story. And we're going to get into those in a second. But one of the biggest thematic elements inside of Avatar The Last Airbender, which sort of sets it apart from Western storytelling in general, is transgenerational ethics and trauma, which
mhm,
is something that we don't often bring up except for in um as it relates to climate change in
mhm.
North America and the world that we're leaving behind for our children and the children's children out there, right? Our
Right.
children's children. The principle of transgenerational responsibility requires that we understand that we have a responsibility to the generation that comes after us and the even further forward.
Mhm,
And many times in North American storytelling and Western storytelling, we only view the story within the life to death time frame of a character
mm,
rather than in the story actually began long, 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 long time ago. And there has been innumerable amount of avatars before us, and there will be innumerable amount of avatars after us.
right.
And that there is a continuity to the world, that the cycle is always repeating. And in some ways, the trauma that occurs to Aang in, the genocide of his entire people, as well as the trauma to the world, Katara, Sokka experiencing this trauma, etc., is to show us that these wounds don't just last one generation.
Mhm.
And we have a responsibility. And this brings in this transgenerational ethics that is not brought into Western storytelling that
No.
often. We have a
Mm-mm.
responsibility to the people that come after us to make the world a better place.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely this idea in Western storytelling that it's obviously we've talked about this before, this hyper individualism. And like you said, it's their story, it's their life, their death. There is not necessarily the concept of rebirth. There is more so the concept of passing something down, which is a different type of rebirth because it's giving your story to the people who are coming after. That is a type of rebirth. It's living in the next generation. But in
Hmm.
Eastern storytelling, you get this idea that like there's no difference between the story that is being told now with this person and the next story or the story that came before
Hmm.
that. It's
It's
all the
all,
same story.
yeah, you could be the person that is reborn
Yeah.
into the next generation and experience the world that you left behind, basically. And
Yeah.
that's sort of a realistic view of karma. This also ties to the theme of consumption, which is
Mhm.
brought out by the fire and how influential the Fire Nation is inside of this story. And it ties to the theme of the House of Atreus, which is, if we have not reached the serpent hasn't reached the lotus,
Mhm.
then it is only consuming. Other ways we
Yeah,
see this is when the Ouroboros is not eating its own tail,
exactly.
which is a symbol for balance and alchemical union across the board. And if you are only consuming, you are only consuming the future for the children and the people to come ahead. So that's the transgenerational
Mm.
trauma that is imparted on the world. And it is explicitly textual in this
Mhm.
story in a way that has not been present in the animation, which I'm
Right.
excited to point out.
Yeah, 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 and that's something we didn't quite clearly state with our adaptation talk, but yeah, the way that they're doing this particular adaptation is they are taking the themes that are present throughout the entire show, and with the knowledge of the beginning, middle, and end, they're able to better.
Weave those in and call them out at
Yeah,
important moments. Yeah.
they're putting them in there from the very beginning, whereas before we didn't necessarily know where the story was going to go. We didn't know how Aang was
Hmm.
going to deal with this threat, and now that we know, it's like, okay, well, we can start from the beginning and do it a little differently, mess around
And
with it a little
we've
bit.
seen this done in other adaptations where they're able to weave in stronger symbolism and character discussion around the thematic elements of the story. And when it's brought out from the get-go, you know the story that you're telling, and you can weave in the symbolism and also the textual conversation early on. It makes it a stronger adaptation.
Yeah, absolutely. The Four Noble Truths, I just wanted to touch on this briefly because it is another form of wheel
Yeah.
hero journey type of situation. So the Noble Eightfold Path and the Four Noble Truths. The Four Noble Truths start with suffering, so it's like an acknowledgement of this is pain, this is suffering. Number two is finding the origins of that pain, finding the origin of suffering. I believe it's like greed, hate, and I forget the third one that's typical in Hinduism, but it doesn't have to be those three. It's just recognizing this is the origin of all of suffering and the human cycle. And then the third one is the cessation from suffering. This is how we end suffering. And then the fourth one is it's through the eightfold path. This is the path to cessation. This is how you are able to cut yourself off from suffering. And Avatar does mess with these themes because it over the whole arc of the show, it's very much doing this for all of the characters. And I think this is something it's not super present in season 1, but I think that we're going to see this path through from the beginning to the end of the live adaptation. But also I do think you could look at the original show through just the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path, absolutely. And the Eightfold
Hmm.
Path is just to summarize the wheel in the center of this image. It has 8 spokes, and so each part of this wheel is that image that I showed earlier, which is the wheel of life. That is the eightfold path. So all these things are related. They're all connected. Um, and again, it's just the repeating of the cycle of life and death and rebirth. So let's briefly talk about Western archetypal influences. This is so interesting because one of the things that came out when the first episode dropped, I remember everybody was criticizing the live action show because it used like almost the same lines from Superman Man of Steel. And
Really?
I don't think you saw that, did you? It was like when Gyatso tells Aang, that he's the Avatar, Aang responds saying something along the lines of, why can't you we just keep pretending that you're my friend? And Gyatso says, you are my friend. And it's the same set of lines that, Superman said to his father, why can't we keep pretending that I'm your son? You are my son.
Funny.
Yes, yes, because you know what it does, funny enough, it acknowledges that Aang is a Superman archetype in a way.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of ways, they really, really put a lot of Superman flavor into this character.
Mm-hmm.
Even though, like, he's a monk and whatnot, I would say Superman's pretty much of a
Monk-like.
monk. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So yeah,
Mild-mannered reporter is the modern day version of a monk. You heard it here
exactly.
first.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. So Aang is kind of this, like, he's Christ-like. He's got a lot of
Mm-hmm.
Christ-like, attributes to him. He also, and Superman is Christ-like as well. That's a very typical, analogy when people talk about Superman. And yeah, Aang fits a lot of these as well. Yeah, so, and let's talk about how he is symbolic of, I know you wanted to talk about the divine child. It's also, I
It's
mentioned
the
this
same thing.
earlier, it's all the same thing. The Philosopher's Stone, the
Mm-hmm.
Holy Grail,
It's the same thing.
which contains, yeah, and the Holy Grail contains Christ's blood. So this is directly
Mm-hmm.
related to that myth. And if you ever kind of go into Campbellian thought and like mythological storytelling and the myths of the Holy Grail, that was all about this process of individuation. That was all about trying to find this grail which contained Christ's blood, but in reality, like, the symbol was about figuring out who you were. It was typically knights that
Mm-hmm.
would go on these journeys, that would transition from boy to man to lover to king. We're going to talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately Aang becomes this symbol of eternal life through not the literal eternal life, but lasting beyond this reality. And as the Avatar,
Mm-hmm.
he already is this,
Mm-hmm.
but he's also the key to other people being able to be that. He's the key for other people that he influences in this world to leave something behind and actually have it stay and be impactful, because he's encouraging a new society, a new world, and that's
Yeah.
White Lotus and whatnot.
The word that Jungian psychologist Marie-Louise von Franz uses for this is conscientio, which is the divine child, which is the outcome of alchemical union, aka the elixir, the
Yeah.
Holy Grail, the Philosopher's Stone, the special thing that you find in the darkness that is the thing that helps you transform the external world that you return to out of a deep journey inside of yourself. And oftentimes in stories, the Canientio will actually present as a divine child. And so
Mhm.
that's Dionysus, Jesus, Heracles, Horus, Buddha. Willow has a version of it if you want me to call out. That's Elora Danan.
Yeah, yeah.
And the divine child comes as a herald of societal change. So it represents that there is, as the divine child gains more power in the world, there will also be an apotheosis at a societal level, and a transformation that happens at a societal level, because they will extend the wisdom that they will experience themselves and bring the elixir back to to those. And that's how it absolutely connects to Superman, in that Superman, Clark Kent, Kal-El, is a divine child who comes from the stars to save the earth. It is straight Jesus metaphors.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely. Yeah.
Um
Yeah,
and
because
it is, so the divine child is not only the outcome of alchemical union, but also the precursor, because these things never end. They are a cycle. There will always be a divine child. There will always be an avatar. That's how this is all connected to how, spirituality expresses this across the globe, basically.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the another connection there is that Aang, we never really meet Aang's parents.
Mm-mm.
So he is born into this monk family. And in the live action,
Mm-hmm.
they focus on this. It's a different dynamic that they have in the live action than compared to the original. In the original, you can only kind of imply or assume certain dynamics. But in the live action, it is very much that you have a lot of these kids and they're all a
Mm-hmm.
part of this bigger family, and they have multiple parents that all sort of take similar responsibility for them. They're just not, Aang's relationship with Gyatso is a father-son relationship in a way. But they're not actually related, and Gyatso
Mm-hmm.
is related to Aang just as he is related to the other kids in that lifestyle. So
Mm-hmm.
and Buddha was born from the side, of his parent. Like he wasn't born naturally. Christ was immaculate conception.
Mm-hmm.
Anakin, was
Immaculately conceived as
immaculately
well through
conceived
the
as well.
Force.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yep.
midichlorians, and this is all like this unnatural birth is all a part of
Dionysus was
that.
also born from the side of from the thigh of
Right,
Zeus.
right,
Yeah, this is a common motif that you don't experience in normal
right.
sort of childhood.
Yeah, and what it does, it indicates that that child immediately, even as a baby, is a
Separate.
god.
Yeah.
Is separate, is a god, or is destined to be a god.
Hmm.
And that's, yeah, like Hercules would be another one. Like it's very much they already have the godlike attributes, but they also are destined and almost doomed to go on this
Hmm.
journey, even if they don't want to. So
Yep.
yeah. All right. So this to kind of wrap up this Campbellian thing that we're doing here that we've been talking about. I have an image of like the monomyth, which is in the middle. This is Campbell's hero's journey, which goes counterclockwise, or at least that's how he like would have preferred it to go. You see a lot of images that go clockwise.
Well,
Counterclockwise is against
he
the
yeah,
Mhm.
counterclockwise means that you're making your own path, whereas
Right.
if you go clockwise, you're making
You're
the
going through
path that
the
other people have defined for you.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is funny enough, like I mean, that is the wheel of life is clockwise.
Hmm.
And then, we talked about the symbol of Buddha in the background is not within the wheel, but Buddha's pointing to the moon. And the moon, it's taking a different journey around the world. And that automatically is a symbol of counterclockwise. That is telling you you need to take a different journey,
You
not
need
on
to do your
along this
own
wheel.
journey.
Yep, do your own
Yeah.
journey. And the alchemical journey, which is on the left here, this is kind of interpreted, this is my interpretation of it, but this is another death and rebirth cycle. It goes
Hmm.
through the same steps as the monomyth journey. It goes through the same steps as the journey through the chakras. This is all about leaving the physical world and transcending into the conscious idea of yourself, and then even beyond that, the conscious idea that other people are within that as well. And we're all just kind of in the dark bouncing off of each other trying to make the best with what we have, right?
Hmm.
So all of these are the same journey. It's all about the life, death, and rebirth. And just to briefly touch on the East versus West stuff that's going on, makes this it makes it so much more, I would say, full. There's a lot of different ways you can look at this. You can look at it from just a Western perspective, or you can look at it from an Eastern perspective, and that's what makes this story so interesting. But the Western, or I think in Campbellian point of view, we would say like Occidental, looks for a relationship between God and man, or man to God, and that's kind of like what the intention is. That's the goal, is to kind of find this relationship between God to man, or man to God, and that typically will mean a contradiction, because there is such a separation between the two that you will end up having to choose. You know, are you going to choose allegiance to God, or are you going to choose allegiance to man? You see a lot of this in Western religions, but in the Eastern mythology, you see that there is no difference between man and God, and that ultimately the cycle of the gods, which is, the avatars and whatnot, is the same cycle that man is on. You see this in the Chinese epics of the cycle between being a god to being just a mortal being to being an animal. All of that is the same cycle as your regular human life. So ultimately, it's weird because they function the same, because the goal is transcending the binaries in both cases. In both like the
Mhm.
Western storytelling and the Eastern storytelling, they are telling the same story, but they are doing it slightly differently, and it does cause this contradiction in Western thought that I think that the OG Avatar has sometimes trips over. It's like, oh, we're telling this from a, Eastern philosophy point of view, and then they end up tripping over some of the more rigid Western archetypes that have to do with like the American monomyth and whatnot, and that's what makes it so contentious from an analytical point of view, is that they're not always entirely sure why they're telling what they're telling, or they're not entirely sure uh
Right.
the function of this myth. So I just wanted to briefly touch on that. I think that's why there's so much contention. And it can be a good thing. There is a lot of really great meta in the Avatar community and the fandom community, and I love it. I mean, that's what we're doing here right now, is meta. So
Mhm.
it's fascinating. So let's get into archetypes. So please explain to everyone what this matrix is.
Oh, sure. So archetypes are often associated with Jungian psychology and the archetypes that we have within ourselves, shadows in ourselves that we have to confront or we project onto other people. This is actually about the life archetypes that Campbell talks about in Hero with a Thousand Faces. I also recommend K.M. Whalen's books and site. You can just Google her. She is an amazing resource, and she actually pulls together Campbell and Maureen Murdoch from a heroine's journey perspective, and Clarissa Piccola Estes from a wild woman archetype perspective. And it actually goes through the kind of three phases of life, which is our early phase where we're learning how to individuate ourselves from the community. The second phase where we are leading the community, or we are taking on leadership responsibilities within the community. And the third phase where we're no longer the leader of of the community, but we are there to still contribute, mentor, or provide knowledge that we have learned along the way. Each of these main paths, maiden, hero, queen, king, crone, mage, are the positive change archetypes
Mhm.
within the different phases. If for some reason you're like stuck, or you're either aggressive or passive within your phase of life, or as a character, is if they are acting aggressively or passively in what they're doing. And they usually it's because they don't want to progress further. And you talked about the first chakra being earth, and how it's guarding against moving on to the next chakra, right? Which is
Mhm.
hero. In this, it's actually really fascinating because Maiden is all about learning to become separate from the community, to become ungrounded, to move on to the flow of life. Hero being about understanding your own power and your sexuality, your love, and interest in loving others. Queen is about uh identifying yourself with the things that you have created in the world.
Mhm.
King is about expanding that to all creations.
Mhm.
Crone is about having sacrificed yourself fundamentally for the kingdom, learning how to live past a spiritual death. And then Mage is taking all of the wisdom along the way and choosing to not leave the world until the whole world is saved,
Mhm.
as much as
Yeah.
you can save it. And
Yeah.
so each of these phases has a both aggressive, which is the upper version, and a passive version where you're stuck and you're not positively moving on to your next phase of life, and you end up taking on very specific characteristics associated with that. For maidens, which, although these are gendered, it's actually more of a reference into there are more feminine stories out there that focus on these feminine stages, but they're ungendered from an archetype perspective.
Mhm.
It actually more ties to whether you need to integrate an internal journey, or you need to bring different pieces together, or individuate, which is fight externally.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
And so Maiden is integration of different aspects into yourself. Hero is individuate, push against the outside world and separate yourself from others. Queen is taking to integration and taking in, you know, the family, and or becoming a parent, or creating, a nuclear situation, a village, etc.
Mm.
uh and individuate is you are a ruler, you have to make leadership decisions for an entire country, and those harder decisions, we get a lot of that from Boomy in
Mm.
this.
Yeah. Yeah.
um and Crone, of course, integrate the idea and thought of death into yourself. And individuate is thinking about the whole world, you yourself trying to figure out how to help a world when you're an old mage. And each of the phases you can get stuck in, or you could become a negative aspect of the phase and still progress on to another negative aspect. We see a lot of that with villains as they move through their different phases. We have a
Yeah.
lot of maidens in this story who are trying to figure out how to sort of come of age and pull away and become more independent of their parental figures that are around them, or the people that have come before in the case of Aang. And we have heroes who are trying to awaken in their responsibility. This is the most common story that people will be familiar with. This is the hero's journey. This is Campbell 101. Um this is all about going out, slaying the dragon, finding the elixir, finding love, and then bringing it back to the village to make
Right.
it a better place. And then Queen is the second act of life, which we have a fair amount of queens. I don't actually think we have any kings yet. Um, but this is about positively accepting the power that they have and allowing the children that are around them, their little ducklings, their little children, to assume roles within the conflict and accepting leadership for themselves, moving on to being a king.
Mhm.
Um, And those are the primary three archetypical phases that we have in this story, which I find super interesting. We may have a crone in Iroh. I
Mm,
classified him as a mentor because he doesn't really move at all throughout the
yeah.
story. He's really, really consistent, which is a flat archetype. Those also exist: lover, ruler, parent,
Mm.
child. And in fact, Aang starts as a flat archetype as a child, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But there is one more archetype I didn't mention in this, and that is the that Campbell refers to in Hero with a Thousand Faces, and that's the saint archetype. And all of the avatars are classified as saints
Yeah, totally. I love that.
because they're unmoving. They offer wisdom somehow to the world beyond. Force ghosts in Star Wars are saints from an archetype perspective because they're unchanging and one with the universe.
Well, and they have like a sainthood symbol, like they have like Kyoshi is the saint of like
Patron saint of,
warriorhood.
yeah, warriors.
Yeah, she's a
Yeah.
warrior. That's why that episode is built around her.
Hmm.
Whereas like Roku is like this a friend, someone who tries to make sense out of conflict, and more of a sage, more of a
Hmm.
yeah. And yeah, you could pretty much do that with all of them. And one other thing I wanted to mention too, looking at this now, after just going through all of you know, the chakra stuff, is that you could easily lay the
The
first six
chakras. Hmm.
chakras along this and see it, and then just add one more, and that's your
That's the
transcendent
saint.
form. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
your saint. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's very clear that these things are very much related. And that's what you're saying with the maiden guarding the hero, being where it sits in the chakras.
Yeah.
And so like
Because,
basically air would be king.
hmm,
That particular chakra would be similar to that. That's
yeah.
fascinating.
I
That's absolutely
do like,
fascinating.
based on the original show, by the time that Aang fights the Phoenix King, who is a
Mm-hmm.
Ozai,
Right,
he
right.
is a king himself.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
so I do think that we will see all of those phases um throughout the show. Um
Yeah.
for him. Yeah.
Yeah, we will. Yeah. And another
Yeah.
thing is, I think it's important with this is that every person that falls along this is just one step away from falling ahead, behind, or,
Yeah,
up or
you can
down.
revert actually.
Yeah.
It's been done in shows or in, especially between seasons, sometimes people will revert, like, people to be like a like that you were solidly a hero. Why are you acting like a maiden, or why are you in that? Just
Right.
so that they can catch the current viewing audience up to speed.
Mm.
Um Also, being in a negative archetype, and I'll talk about this a little bit, isn't like you're a villain.
Yeah. Yeah.
But villains are negative archetypes. Everybody goes in and out of these archetypes depending on how, whether they're being extremely passive or extremely aggressive, and
Mm.
are not in a positive change journey. They're not taking the steps to do what they need to do to sort of master the challenge of the phase that they're in. And for maidens, the phase is to work towards individuating themselves from the society that they're in and the authority that manages them,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And for heroes, it's about conquering the challenges of the world, moving out into the larger world to make an impact. And so, just by the perspective that we are given, we have, theoretically very similar aged characters in Katara and Aang, but they're in two different life phases, which is really, really interesting to see
Yeah.
because of how they play out within the story.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
it totally makes sense why they focus so much on, in some ways, like, people complain that Aang didn't learn water bending yet.
Yeah. I have thoughts about
Right?
that too.
but it'll make sense as we go
Yeah.
through the stories. And where is he at? He's literally unprepared for that.
Yeah. I completely agree. It wasn't, that's not what was being explored. Yeah. And that's,
Yeah.
we'll see that as we talk about the journeys. Yeah, totally. I love this. I love this thing. And so we're going to go through each of the characters and talk about kind of their movement through these and the
Yeah.
types of things that you've been seeing. So let's start with Aang. I know we talked a little bit about him being the divine child, but
Yeah. And he
tell us
starts out
more.
as a flat archetype, a child, right?
Hmm.
He is a child at the start of the show when we see him with the airbenders. And he is the monks around him are saying, no, no, no. You have to grow up. He has you're often pushed to say you have to take on this responsibility by mentors. And in the maiden arc, a common motif that you see is that the maiden is stalked by a predator.
Ooh, I think I know who
And
that is.
so the predator is a part of our own subconscious that is almost forcing us to confront death and in sometimes sex. And oftentimes they are in the same person. I'm talking about Kylo Ren.
When are we not talking about Kylo Ren?
No, 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 no.
Honestly.
But like these are really interesting things to think about from your own psychology,
Yeah.
especially if you're like, I love the dangerous lover motif
Mm.
in story. It's quite literally because they're the same person. Clarissa Piccola Estes uses Bluebeard as the big example of the predator in a folktale uh motif. Bluebeard, of course, being the husband that the young maiden marries, and he says, you can open any door in my whole kingdom, you can do whatever you want except for this one door downstairs to the left. Can't open that, never open that door. And in the end, it turns out that Bluebeard was killing his wives and shoving them in that door,
Hmm.
right? And only through her own trust of her intuition and the protectors in incorporating and internalizing the protectors that were around her did she choose to open the door and overthrow Bluebeard, the predator in her life. And so the predator motif is so common in maiden archetypes that, like, we don't even question it. Like,
Hmm.
um what was the story? Cursed, with
Mm,
the
yeah.
guy that was like chasing her everywhere, and
Yeah,
we're like,
yeah.
oh, that's so interesting. And
Hmm.
psychologically we're very drawn to that because of when we see that psychologically on screen, the turn from predator to lover
Hmm.
is that we have done an alchemical union with
Yeah,
ourselves,
yeah. Because we
right?
see
And so,
ourselves in both of those characters.
yeah,
Right.
exactly. And so the primary predator for Aang is Zuko,
Right.
right? And when we have a predator, it's because we need to understand that the predator is trying to redeem themselves in the wrong way,
Hmm.
and that we need to internalize that. And so Zuko is very passionate about his honor, although he never says the word
In the
in the
he,
live action
yeah,
version.
he doesn't say it in the live action. That's right.
His honor and his duty, right? And that is the main struggle that Aang has. He is Zuko's trying to do his honor and his duty in the way that other people tell him he should do it.
Yeah, because he's not going counterclockwise in his journey. He's going clockwise. He's following the wheel as it is laid out for him.
Exactly. And
Mhm.
so this is all, like, if you get stuck in a negative aspect like a damsel, obviously the word, you're trapped, you're passively avoiding responsibility, or you're a vixen, which is that you are sort of aggressively avoiding individualization and initiation into adulthood. You're fighting against trying to grow up, and you have to confront the predator and
Yeah.
own your own predator in yourself. And so the struggle against duty is something that both Zuko and Aang share, and thus they are foils of each other in this version in a
Mhm.
way that is really actually quite powerful, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, I adore them too. Their fights are
Dallas is
oh,
mm,
Dallas is
mm, mm, mm.
incredible.
The
He's
fight, yeah.
incredible.
The one
The
fight we'll get
fighting,
to, but the one fight
yeah.
is like the best example. And so um Aang specifically struggles against the two good mothers and naive fathers that are
Mm,
surrounding him, the past avatars and Gyatso, and he's constantly trying to get the other avatars to and Gyatso to solve his problems for him.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Oh,
he
can you
could.
just possess me so I don't need to do this?
Yeah,
So I don't need to grow up? I don't need to go through puberty?
because that's what it really is. It's all
It is
about,
the
yeah,
symbol of entering puberty when you become a hero.
which is so interesting from the fact that Gordon, who is 12, he
Uh,
was 12 when they filmed this, I think, for the most part, and now he's like 14, and like it's so fascinating that they're uh they're fitting these archetypes even better. Like even
mhm.
the actors that are playing them are filling these roles. It's so interesting.
Yeah. And so Aang fluctuates between damsel and maiden for most of the story. He does actually move on to hero and then back to maiden briefly, but ends
Hmm.
up taking on hero by the end of the story
Yeah, and he
of the episode series, yeah, or this
most likely
season.
he's going back to Maiden at the beginning of the next
Hmm.
one. Yeah, because I think that that's gonna be
It
they're
sort
gonna
of
have
depends on
to.
what they might end up actually playing him more like a vixen in that he just wants to have fun and he's just like
Yeah, they could.
avoidant
Hmm.
in an aggressive want to have fun kind of way.
Hmm.
Which would be really interesting because that's actually more what he is in the cartoon is he's kind of
Right.
avoiding fun by being aggressively fun.
Yeah, exactly. They could do a few things with it. I think that
Hmm.
we have some possibilities. Uh
Hmm.
just a quick mention, this is like my interpretation of Aang's journey. As we were talking about the archetypes, this seemed like a good time to bring it up. But this is just my personal map of Aang's journey because along the lines of like the lesson that the show was trying to go for in the live action, it was about Aang trying to figure out what being an avatar meant. Started with, being an avatar is lonely. And then as he meets Kyoshi, as he starts to realize the uh things that he can do, he realizes that the avatar is powerful. Kyoshi, possesses
Hmm.
him and whatnot. And then he has we'll talk about some of these things as we talk about the episodes, the different challenges that he's met with, that he realizes that his friends are powerful. And then
Hmm.
that's when you have a binary. Now you have a binary that's uh the avatar is powerful, my friends are powerful. And can't quite reconcile the two. And it's not until towards the end that he recognizes that he is more powerful
With his
through
friends.
his
Yeah.
friends, with his friends. And that's having to kind of transcend this binary that's set up. And it is brilliantly done, I have to say. I thought it was very, very well done. And it follows the traditional hero's journey, which is that very much a Western perspective of all storytelling, but it also follows kind of the journey of the chakras. There's a lot of Hindu inspiration in there, not only within yoga, but also in the story of the Buddha and the story of uh the different folklore that's behind that. And I'll mention some of that as well. So yeah, so I posted this on Twitter, but it's also
I love
here
it.
if you want to look at it. Yeah, it's It's fun. Super, I love mapping people's journeys. All right, let's talk about Katara's archetypes.
And as I mentioned before, she isn't a maiden for very long.
Mhm.
I would say that she's kind of a damsel-like figure because she isn't water bending. She feels very trapped in herself. She's not aggressive. Uh, the maiden also tends to not leave the village. I would say that Aang's association with his home is on his sky bison means he never really leaves his village
Ooh, yeah.
until a certain point in the story, and then he does. And that's when he leaps into hero,
Yeah,
which is
absolutely.
right. But Katara choosing to leave the village right away actually means that she aggressively moves into hero right away. And we see that reflected in how she acts.
Mm.
She is haunted by her mother and what happened. Uh, and is actually explores that not as a maiden would
Yeah.
in the Too Good Mother, but actually through resolving the need and desire for power versus the need and desire for love, which is
Mm.
the main through line of the hero journey,
Mhm.
right? Power versus love. She doesn't spend a whole lot of time in any of the negative archetypes, which she's on a positive change journey and
Mhm.
doesn't fall into shadow archetypes very often. So I
Mhm.
can see why people are like, well, she wasn't angry and aggressive like a bully, which she was
Mm.
the in the cartoon a fair
Right.
amount. She was very aggressive in moments.
Yes.
She had a lot of anger. I do hope that they explore that later on, but it actually might make sense more with the sorceress phase
Yeah.
later on with
Yeah.
like some of the stories that they might tell.
Yeah, because
Um
but as we talked about a little bit before we started recording, is like Katara serves a different purpose in the original story, and that she kind
than
of
this.
falls into whatever archetype is needed for that particular part of the story. Um,
She's the goddess for all the men.
yeah.
She's the mother, she's the vixen, she's the mother figure, right? She's
Yeah.
not her own person, unfortunately, even though like because she shifts so much in the cartoon.
Yeah.
Um I liked her anger in the cartoon and I feel like
Mhm.
it added more to her, but I hope to see that in like later storytelling.
I agree. I think that there's a lot of pressure on women and women characters in these
Mhm.
kinds of stories, especially mythical stories, fantasy stories. And I think that we have been given too much of women who have to be everything. And I
Mhm.
think that we have to remember that, like, women can be, they can follow just a straight through line through these archetypes, just as the male characters have been for so long. And
Mhm.
that's also interesting and valid. And, can't I'm cringing at myself for saying it's valid. But it's interesting. We can analyze this from this perspective, and we can still get a lot out of it. They don't have to be everything. A Katara doesn't have to be everything for the story. She doesn't have to fulfill all these purposes. She can have a singular journey, and have a character and a personality within that as well. I think that's ultimately probably what you're saying. And that's what I would say as well, is like, I want to see more of her personality come through. The problem is that the original story had a personality that I would say was not very helpful for a lot of young women at that time, because it presented a lot of challenges, a lot of issues with feminine archetypes. It presented more of some of the more
Tropes.
negative tropes, negative aspects of being a young woman and being forced to be a mother archetype, be uh, you know,
The
be a
love
bitch.
interest.
Or
Be a
be a
bitch.
bitch, yeah, like, be
Mhm.
the one that's like, I'm just being reasonable, I'm just being logical, I'm the only one that's being an adult right now. Like, there's a lot going on with that character that I think is just unfair.
I don't particularly blame Mae Whitman because she was like an amazing voice actress.
Oh yeah, totally.
I don't know that you can look at the story and really define Katara as a character. That
I
might be
agree.
controversial. Especially in the first season.
Yeah,
It gets better,
it does get
but
better. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, yeah, I think
Again, we've talked about
Toph.
this. I also don't think that like Aang had a good solid like what he was going through.
Mhm.
I look back on it and the first season had some rough edges.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. I think, yeah, and I again, rose-colored glasses, like, a lot of us, uh, some of us grew up with this. I was a teen when I first watched the show. But yeah, it had a big impact on me. I look at it now and I think it failed in a lot of ways, but I would have never said that a few years ago. I would have said it was
Hmm.
perfect, but no, it's not perfect. And I think that you can have productive conversations no matter how you want to flip it. If you want to say Tara was a great character because of X and X reason, I think that that's also an interesting conversation to bring to the larger conversation. So yeah, I
I
think.
really I really struggled with who her predator was if she was ever in the
mm,
maiden arc, and you can't even tell who her predator is.
well, in the live action they
Yeah,
give
it's
her
Zuko.
one. Oh, well, okay, I was actually gonna say with the co stuff, because
Oh, with Ko, yeah.
it's very aggressive, whereas they did not put that, was not in the original. There was no
Yeah,
like
because
haunting.
she's not a maiden at all, and
Hmm.
it's more about the confrontation with Jet and her attraction to him, even though he ends up being not in a positive change. He's in a bad
Right.
place mentally. I'll get
Yeah,
to him
yeah.
too.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about him too. Talk about
All right,
everyone.
Sokka.
Let's go on to Sokka. We can talk about Katara like all day. All
Yeah,
right.
he is the one that wavers the most between being a coward and a hero throughout the journey. He constantly is saying like, "Hey, we want to go home," and then he kind of says, I mean, his big hero moment is, "Oh, we're going after this kid." Like he chooses to leave the village, so he moves
Mm,
from maiden, who is sort of defined by the walls of his village, on to being a hero fairly quickly, but goes into this shadow archetype of being a coward in that he is defined by his passive refusal to take responsibility for his place in the world. The balance between hero and love is constantly played out with Suki and Yue,
hmm.
and he discovers his own power throughout the course of the story, engineering
Yeah.
and strategy, right? He becomes more confident in his power throughout the course of this story. I also see him probably moving on to be, I think they're all going to be kings
Hmm.
by the end of the third season, just because of archetypically that's usually what happens when a bunch of heroes level up. You know,
Yeah.
from a phase of life perspective, not actually experience. All right, Zuko.
Zuko, my
No,
baby
baby
boy.
boy.
He's the
He
best.
is a maiden vixen. He's aggressive,
Mm,
but he is also defined by the rules of his parental figure.
hmm.
So how we compare him to characters like Kylo Ren is defined by his parental controlling figure out there, his father's expectations, Snoke for Kylo Ren, and he really struggles to individuate himself and make different decisions than what his father has told him is the rule of law, even if that rule of law isn't fair,
Mm-hmm.
right? And he doesn't actually start to individuate until he chooses to become the blue spirit.
Hmm.
Um, and then he moves into a hero phase, which I'll get into in the later episodes. His predator is Zhao. Um,
Yeah.
in that he often, like Bluebeard, the maiden is married to the predator
Ah, yeah.
and betrayed by the predator. And that's also why Aang and Zuko end up being married in the Blue Spirit phase of both of their arcs. And it's really interesting how that plays out. So I'll get to that when we get to the
Yeah.
episodes. But Zhao, being Zuko's predator personified, is the shadow. So he needs to resolve the fact that, as I said, the predator represents seeking redemption in all the wrong places. And Zhao
Mhm.
is willing to go to ending the world to win,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so Zuko thinks he's the type of guy who needs to go and end the world to win, but he's not that guy.
Hmm.
And that's the predator that he has to confront.
Hmm.
Isn't that
That's cool.
interesting?
Yeah, it's very interesting looking at it in pairs in a way.
Yeah, and they're
Yeah.
Aang and Zuko are mirrored as almost like divine twins from a symbol perspective. We see that kind of throughout this whole season. And the choices that they make are uh they enter the hero phase together, which is
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah. Yeah. And speaking of, so this would very much be like a interesting ship discussion. But one thing I forgot to mention was that from a elemental symbolic perspective, Katara being water and Aang being air,
Hmm.
those are archetypes for mother and father.
Oh, like of the world, yeah.
Yeah. So that's another kind of
Hmm.
symbol thing that is there where it's not necessarily opposites, but it does have an archetypal like, meaning or
Hmm.
purpose behind it. So and you can see it. Father and mother is very much, especially in Korra, the kind of
Yeah,
effect that they have on the world. So yeah, this is so interesting. But
that's cool.
yeah. So Iroh, Uncle Iroh.
Iroh. So he is in his crone phase in that he has spiritually died with the death of his son. It's only like shown few ways, like a bit in the show, like with the funeral of his son. But now he's kind of flat because he's only fulfilling this role of being a mentor to Zuko. I actually think he will move on past that into mage, like when he joins the White Lotus,
Mm-hmm.
and cares more about saving the world than just his self, like his own like personal mentoring the hero,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Uh, but he has to make sure that Zuko is grown past him at that
Hmm.
phase. But he, common mentors are Obi-Wan Kenobi
Yeah.
to Luke, etc., right?
Yep. Yoda.
Yeah, he's moved past his own ego death and has lived, and but feels sadness for those that are lost in the world.
Yeah.
That's the kind of, yeah, it fits him. Azula, let's move on.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Azula.
She is a vixen, which is that she is an aggressive shadow archetype of maiden. And again,
Hmm.
maidens are defined by the parental figures that are around them. And when I get to Ozai, it'll make so much more sense. Um, it's an aggressive personification. And so like we see this in the first episode, which we'll go into, but like lashing out against authority, but in truth they're unwilling and able to accept their own internalized sovereignty.
So she's unable to accept her internal sovereignty. Yeah, we can see that. She struggles a lot.
Yeah, like she
Hmm.
wants to have all this authority, but yet she's like, you know what?
Hmm. Yeah.
So she still brings people back to dad to take care of them like a cat.
Yeah. That's so true. She is like a cat bringing the wounded
So she's
back to,
aggressive, but it's in
yeah.
all of this avoidance of all of the things that Ozai has given her.
Mm,
And really
interesting.
it's avoiding initiation into adulthood. So she's
Right.
avoiding becoming her own person that is separate from Ozai.
Mm. She probably
Yeah, and it's
steps out of that. Yeah.
classic bad girl.
Yeah. Classic
The
bad girl.
vixen. Yeah.
She's great. All right. And Ozai.
Yeah. So
This is a
if you
cool
move
one.
yeah, if you move to this thing, I need to talk a little bit about where he's at. So because he's a bad king, you would think
Hmm.
he's a king, as a tyrant, but the frame of the story is given to us through the eyes of his children, through the lens of his children. And so he's actually in the queen phase, and he's the aggressive negative version of that, which is the sorceress. Again, not gendered, but this is an aggressive refusal to protect what they love. And so those that have watched the cartoon know he sent his wife away into like
Yeah.
yeah, like sent his wife away to become the king, to become the next Fire Lord. Um there is not transformation from a sorceress perspective. There is only sacrificing your children. And children that they continue to sacrifice will pay and pay and pay until they break free of the sorceress.
Yeah.
They are unable to sacrifice for the people that they love without a cost associated with that. And the sorceress traps their dependents into not advancing and individuating. So that's where we find both Zuko and Azula through much of this whole season.
Yeah.
When the sorceress, if they don't move into a positive change arc and sort of reconcile and become a queen, becomes a tyrant, is when they no longer care about the lives of anyone and are only willing to do things for power. Death is always on the line. And so seeing the kind of end scene of season 1, we know exactly where Ozai is headed.
Yeah. With the
Right.
comet. Yeah.
With the comet, he's willing to scorch the earth. Right. And so you can
Yeah.
kind of see like how, like, because of just framing it from the perspective of his children, he's actually has a different archetype than maybe a king or a tyrant,
Yeah,
even though he's both
absolutely.
of those things.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. All right.
Couple of bonuses. Suki, of course, is a maiden because she's defined by the relationship to her village and to her mother. Jet is a bully. We'll get into that later. The machinist Sai is a snow queen. I would argue that Boomy is also a snow queen. So they're queens because they're all focused on their family or their village. Boomy might also be classified as a puppet king, in that he's not effectual.
Okay.
And all of the avatars are saints.
Yeah, all the avatars are all saints. I love that. I think that's really cool. And we did talk about that.
They've
So,
moved beyond the life phases.
yeah, yeah. And they're handing down their wisdom. All right, so let's talk about the themes and symbols. The way that this is organized is we're going to talk about the episodes through the themes and symbols that they present. So we're not going to get too deep of the details of each episode, but we're going to try to cover like the main themes in each one, because the way that they built the episodes is very thematically minded. So we
They
start
almost have a
out.
moral of the story each episode.
They do. They do. They have a voiceover at the end of almost every episode to tell us what the lesson was that has been learned. It's absolutely fascinating. So the first episode's Aang. It's called Aang. This is very much it's very much about origin stories. And this brings us back to like our Superman stuff, the unnatural births, the fact that he did not come from a typical growing up or having parents, or it's not the typical way of being born or of growing up as a kid in that kind of lifestyle. It's also a last of your kind thing, which, that's similar to the archetypes we were talking about before. Superman was the last of his kind, in a way, similar to, I would say Anakin is kind of fulfilling this a little bit, because it's like he's the only one that has like this level of midichlorians or whatever. He's like the only of his kind up until he has children. So this is very much this goes just back to like what we were saying with the divine child, give your force, your you're thrown into the world with the responsibility of changing it immediately from you being thrown into it. You can't escape
Yeah.
your destiny.
And usually in these situations, you're passed through the threshold of adventure regardless of your own choice because you're a child that has to go on to growing up.
Mhm.
And so the world itself often tells you that you have no choice in moving on and growing up. Literally, the world becomes on fire,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
it is, you know, representative of that. In fact, later on in the episode, the problem is framed both thematically with the fire and the consumption and saying, look, if nobody stops the fire, the whole world will be consumed. And
Mhm.
Iroh even says in the episode, some say it's within our nature to expand and consume like fire. And
Yeah.
so, like how we talked about, the snake is often this symbol of consumption,
Mhm.
endless consumption, the eating snake without eating its own tail. Fire is also that. Uh
Mm.
the firebenders themselves are also called dragons,
Yeah.
i.e. snakes or
Yeah.
serpents. They're all the same thing from a psychological symbolic perspective.
And that's Asian dragons, which are
Yeah,
a little different from
they look like
Western
long snakes.
dragons.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's more
Yeah, they look like serpents.
Ouroboros.
They're the
Right.
Ouroboros not eating its own tail and not
Yes.
participating in the cycle of life, death, life. And in
Right.
fact, the first episode shows us what has broken, which is potentially the avatar cycle.
Right.
An entire nation has been pulled out of the balance to the world.
Yeah. And therefore, and I forgot that I pulled these images, but you know, the Buddha is being born on the left in the image coming out of the side. And then on the right, this is an
Hmm.
image of Aang being born
Being
in a
reborn from the
different,
ice. Yeah.
exactly, being reborn. So yeah, this is and it's so fantastical. Obviously, it's magical in his rebirth.
And like the being reborn or being born twice is actually a common motif of the divine child.
Hmm.
Dionysus is born twice. Superman is born twice.
Yeah. And
Like,
all heroes are born twice in a more
yeah,
symbolic way. But yeah.
like being used to the death and rebirth
Mm,
makes you a dying god.
yeah. Yeah, well, and I think also going back to your, the matrix of the archetypes itself is essentially a life, death, rebirth cycle when you move between the
Yes.
phases.
Yeah.
So
When
that
you're
is,
in the underworld and you finally manage to transform, have an alchemical union of the opposite, like in the maiden phase, you consume that aspect of the predator and take it into yourself and become the protector of a full bodied person. You
yeah,
become the hero. That happens when you are at your lowest point and you decide to become one with the opposite version of yourself and you find the elixir through that and you are
yeah,
collected. The pieces of yourself are collected after you've broken down from an ego perspective or from alchemy perspective. You've broken down and you're reformed into a
yes,
whole being, and suddenly you're a new archetype. That's
yeah,
what happens.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah. You burn down the matter. You have to like remix it and do all this stuff to it in order to like figure out like what is the
Hmm.
new, what does it look like when you reform it, and
Yeah.
how do you rearrange things to make it beautiful. Like
And usually
that's
you're a new version of yourself when that happens. Like
yeah.
psychologically, I think that people struggle with being spiritually dead before they reform, but it happens to everybody. And people
Yeah.
are like, why is he going through that midlife crisis? Well, that's why.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I think it's really Gyatso actually tells like the Council of Airbenders, you know, the thing that Aang needs is to go on a journey because he needs to find out who he is. and his responsibility, i.e., he needs to individuate against, from what he is. But he's also struggling as the naive father that Aang doesn't need to leave his care to do that.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
the world itself tells him that he needs to differentiate and individualize from
Mm,
the airbenders.
mhm.
And that ends up, you know,
Being the worst
being what
possible.
happens.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
oftentimes, parental figures are the threshold guardians of us becoming individuated or going on our journeys. They are the people that stand in the way to say, I don't want you to grow up. And in fact, Gyatso gives him some pretty confusing information like, you must grow up. You are the avatar. I've been forced to tell you this, but don't worry, you'll always be safe with me.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
the lie is already proven
Mhm.
seconds later. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. It's not it provides more questions than it does answers for
Yeah.
Aang and his journey, which is a good thing from a hero for a hero story. All right.
And maiden arcs are always about saving the village,
Mhm.
and moving into individualization where you move out into the larger world to
Yeah.
save the country or fight the dragon, etc. So
Right.
I would classify anything Aang does in association with Appa as maiden. And then he leaves Appa behind,
Mm,
other than just to be his ride at one
right.
point.
Yes. Yeah, in the Spirited Away, I think.
Hmm.
Okay, episode 2, Warriors. This is a episode that explores it's moving into individuation, as we said. This is about who am I, but also more importantly, who is the avatar? Because Aang is not only getting to know who he is, but he's also getting to know what it means to be the avatar and the other avatars that he has within him. This is beginning the struggle, which was presented in the first episode with the genocide of the airbenders,
Hmm.
about this. I don't want to say it's a pacifist society because that's not exactly like 100% what they showed, but there is this idea of this pacifism versus expansion, consumption, violence, aggressiveness that they are presenting in a visual manner. And in this episode we go into a more clear conflict that Aang has with who he is as an avatar and how he is different from other avatars, but also how he is similar to other avatars. So,
Hmm.
and the fact that he has to be, right? So Aang is presented uh for the first time with the idea that he is going to be responsible for people's suffering and death, whether or not he is actually causing it directly. He is an indirect cause for people's suffering. This goes back to like Hindu thought, the cause of suffering, finding the eightfold path in order to end suffering. This is a lot more complicated in practice than it
Yeah.
is in theory. And then, what does it mean to be the avatar? Kyoshi, who presents herself to him, and she says that it's the ultimate weapon. The avatar state is the ultimate
Mm.
weapon, and it's about mastery and strength. uh
Hmm.
but it's also a combination, you know, as we find through this journey that he has, it's a combination of many things that he gets from being an avatar. The Kyoshi is just a part of the puzzle. She's just a part of the equation. Mastery and strength are important, but he's going to learn that there are other parts about being the avatar that he needs to incorporate into himself in his process of individuation. Um,
Hmm.
and this and yeah, like I think you have notes in here too. This is going to relate to
Yeah.
other parts in the story. The other individuals are going through this as well, so
Yeah. Yeah. Like Sokka, like says, "Oh, okay, we've got to go back," but really starts to understand others through, um, I'm going to use love, but liking, Suki, and his desire for love helps him move towards understanding his larger responsibility and the power that he maintains. Like there's the adage, like, the you can see yourself best through the eyes of another person. And so
Mm,
by him talking about his experience and sharing with Suki their shared roles they've had in being the warrior of their village and protecting others, he finds the love for her also makes him understand his larger role to the world. He is
yeah.
a citizen of the world and not just a citizen of the Southern Water Tribe.
Yeah.
Um, Katara continues to show her desire for power and knowledge with the waterbending scroll and practicing that and like owning that as part of her personality, which is great. Aang struggles with power and, like a good maiden, allows Kyoshi to act as a protector against the predators for him.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. I like that. Yeah, because he
And
doesn't want to be the aggressor.
yeah, and in this episode we also get the Zuko's predator of Zhao
Mm,
proposing an alliance with him to control the maiden.
mm, love that. All right, Omashu. This is episode 3, and so now we're moving into who do I trust? This is a
Mhm,
little different from who am I, but it's also intertwined with the who am I question because it's we're talking about like reflections and projections and
mhm,
you're searching for wisdom in other people. You're looking outside of yourself through your internal process. You're now looking outside of yourself to try to figure out who am I and how am I going to have this journey with other people? How am I going to lean on people? Because you have to lean on people. Um, you can't. This is this also is the beginning of the theme of you cannot achieve wisdom if the truth is hidden. And this theme is resolved in the next episode. A lot of and these next 2 episodes are intertwined. Omashu and Into the Dark. Uh
it felt like they built them as 2 episode arcs because like the last
yeah.
2 episodes are paired. Like
Hmm.
they're tied together. Like Omashu and Into the Dark are very tied together, and the first two are
Yeah.
very tied together.
Yeah, I see it that way as well. I know going back to like our Willow rewatches, there was always a way to rewatch the episodes. Like
Hmm.
you watch 2 this night, you watch 1 the next night, you watch 2 everybody had like their way of watching it because there were like themes that were tied up in each other. Uh
Hmm.
my husband and I have a very specific way of rewatching Willow, but but this feels very similar. It's like there are episodic arcs that go between episodes that are really was resolved well. So there's also a gathering of allies that's happening and just in that, who do I trust type of thing. This applies to Zuko as well because we start to see
Hmm.
how his alliances are falling apart and how we see as the audience, not Zuko doesn't see this, but the audience sees that Azula is corresponding with Zhao. So this is all about who do I trust. I can't trust my own family, right? Because this is Katara and Sokka start to have this rift as
Hmm.
well. So yeah, from an archetypal blah, blah, perspective.
Yeah.
All right, tell
Y-
us.
Yeah. And so this is when we're introduced to Azula for the first time. And she's introduced as a spy, which is like the ultimate vixen. And she
Mm.
even, as she reveals who she is, she has this beautiful hair flip moment where her hair is revealed. And then she's like, "Go get him, daddy," which
Yeah.
tells you exactly where she is. She is a maiden vixen, which is she's super aggressive, but she's under the thumb of her dad,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
Jet and Katara gets so much out of this exploration of attractive, like being attracted to Jet and the sort of like heroism that he
Hmm.
represents. Um, and actually she integrates the good memory of her mother because of him. This is all on her side. Like, she did this.
Mm,
I think this is like honestly the most powerful, one of the more powerful parts of the show is like this moment where she thinks about her mother and the good things that happened because of it, not
yeah.
just being stuck in the darkness. And so, like, even when you're dealing with maybe somebody you don't realize is in a shadow archetype themselves, that doesn't mean they can't teach you something.
Yeah.
Asai, of course, is a snow queen, which is the protective, passive version of their aggressive refusal for what they need to do fundamentally to protect those that they love.
Mm,
And we often view snow queens like Elsa from Frozen. They build these like snow castles around themselves to protect themselves from others and to protect their
mm,
children, but in so many ways they're freezing their children. And that's what's
yeah.
happening with Sai. Like, he's giving plans to the firebenders, but he's trying to play both sides and trying to protect himself and not fundamentally choosing sides, and also not being there for his son in the way that his son needs him to be there for him
Mm,
to grow and become his own person.
mhm.
Um and again, that's like snow queens passively protect them so they don't grow up. Sorcerers hurt them so they don't grow up. Like, that's the passive aggressive balance between Ozai and Sai in this.
Yeah.
Jet fundamentally turns out to be a bully, right? So that's the aggressive form of being a hero, and they're often defined by exactly what Katara says. Well, you're gonna become like the firebenders, or you're like the firebenders because you
Mm,
become the thing that you're fighting against. And
yeah.
oftentimes bullies have tons of minions. So all of Jet's friends, Longshot, Pipsqueak, the Duke, all of them, uh he's like, I'm willing to take this so far, I'm gonna blow up the king. Like, no, dude. Like, you're
You're
becoming like
becoming,
you're
yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
Like the ends justify the means, guys. And
Yeah.
in the Aang Zuko fight, which is the most hilarious maiden fight I've seen, they're exactly mirrored in their fight. They're balanced almost in their fight against each other,
Yeah.
fueling each other, and literally moves are like like they literally like like air feeding fire. They
Mhm.
flow
Mhm.
through the moves. It was so well rehearsed, and if you haven't seen the like practice video with Dallas and Gordon, like, go
Yeah.
watch it. It's so good.
It's incredible. And it's something like I thought, when I posted about it, I was like, they're evenly matched, and people are like, well, Aang was using airbending, da da da. I was like, but the symbol of it, it doesn't matter who was using bending or not. The
Archetypically, they're the same.
Art Yes, yeah, archetypically, they are literally evenly matched,
Mhm,
and that's the point. The point was that they are moving, especially when they do the scarf stuff.
mhm.
They're moving through this like flow of scarves, and it's like they
And
are
they're presented
they're
as divine
pulling, and
twins.
yeah, they're pushing and pulling on each other. There's this ebb and flow, and to go back to the chakras, Omashu does present that opening of the second chakra into the
Mhm,
third. So you have that movement from water to fire, you have that movement from excitement to consuming. There This is what's happening in this moment. It's like this and within puberty, it's the sexual realization,
mhm,
attractiveness, being attracted to not only someone you're attracted to, but like also power, and also like with
mhm.
Sokka,
Desire. Yeah,
desire. Yeah, all of
there's
these
things
things
I
are
want.
happening.
Yeah.
Hmm. Hey, it's the I want episode.
I want.
All right. Into the dark. So this is going to, like I said before, this is going to resolve a lot of the initial themes that were brought up in the past episode.
Mhm,
Who is the enemy? The initial idea was, who do I trust? This is the episode where we say, who is the enemy? It's not just about who I trust positively, it's who do I not trust negatively. And there is some cool stuff happening here with Boomy that I didn't think of before until
mhm,
I started really getting into the chakras and getting into Hinduism, which is that there is a position in yoga and and like kind of like this Hindu mythology called Bhumi Parsha. I hope I'm saying that right. It's called earth touching. And it's the
Oh.
position of meditation where you have one palm facing the sky and then you have the other hand touching the earth. And this comes from the tale of Buddha's victory over temptation by a demon king, where he was tempted. It's very similar to like the temptations of Christ, if you want to like compare these things. But it's a temptation to make him move. It was a temptation to make Buddha move from the position that he was in. And the Buddha in the story, he's in a meditative position, but when he is tempted, he takes one hand and he touches the earth. And then in that moment, the earth speaks. The earth speaks and becomes witness to Buddha being immovable. And essentially what the story is telling is that from the temporal, we should yearn to be immovable. This in Campbellian terms, this is out of the field of time. We are participating in life with all of its suffering. So we are in the field of time, but we are also out of the field of time. We are recognizing the eternal within the field of time. This is a lot of
Mask of God stuff.
It's Mask of God stuff. You know, when you're in like if you ever experience being a monk, and this goes for like a lot of different religions actually. If you ever experience that lifestyle, there is an immovability aspect where you decide this is where you are going to sit and this is where you're going to meditate, and you will not move from that space, right? This is also similar to like taking vows of silence and whatnot. So that is what the position of earth touching means, and that has a connection directly to Bhumi, which is fascinating because the lesson that he gives to Aang is also reminiscent of this. Another way to look at this particular, like this position, the earth touching position, it also signifies a union of skill and meditation on the path of enlightenment, and it helps you to transform rage and anger into wisdom.
Cool.
Because that temptation of the demon king telling Buddha to move, Buddha was angry about that, and he decided to transform that into, I'm going to make the earth make witness to me being immovable. And that is where it's channeled into wisdom. So Bhumi provides this like this lesson to Aang of, you know, to take action, to be angry. Bhumi's very, very angry with Aang, and he presents that. And Aang at that time does not learn Bhumi's lesson, you know, the idea of like, you have to make impossible choices. Aang refuses to make impossible choices. Instead,
I think it's because of where he's at from an archetype perspective.
Oh, 100%. It's also where he's at from a hero's journey perspective or a chakra perspective, right? He is unable to see Bhumi's anger and rage. He's not feeling that yet. That's not a part of his journey. So he transforms that in a way to there's a different theme that comes in, which is about seeing something that's difficult to see, right? Seeing Bhumi as the child, as who he knew him as a child. That's one of the things. Remembering who Bhumi was when he wasn't this old, angry man. For Zuko, it's remembering that Iroh and him have a special bond. That's a part of his journey in that moment, or in this episode. That's how Iroh sacrifices himself at the end, and Zuko has to recognize this is actually this is his alliance. His alliance is really only with Iroh. That's the only person he can really trust. With
His first step to moving away from his father's influence, right?
Yeah, this
Is
is
breaking away
first. Yep.
to save someone you love over someone who has sort of like parental influence over you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's that he's already gone through this with Iroh. He just has to
Mm-hmm.
remember. This is a big part in
Well,
myth. This
and
is
there is no, like, it's not truth unless you actually take action.
right. Well, that's Boomy's lesson, and Aang decides to take action in a different way.
Yeah.
It's just
But
so
that's also
interesting.
part of that. That is also fundamentally part of Aang's journey in this season, and it's going to be the whole thing, which is choosing your own path is as important as doing the right thing.
Right.
Like, you know, getting the goal accomplished, but you have to do it your way.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so and then we have Sokka and Katara who are going through the tunnel,
Mm-hmm.
and again they have forgotten what is powerful between the two of them, between it within their relationship as siblings. And something that
Mm-hmm.
happens a lot in shadow work is with siblings is if you are opposite genders, you typically look at the other one as you are everything that I am not, and I am everything that you are not,
Mm-hmm.
because that's the implications of gender that society puts on us. So that's what's happening with Katara and Sokka a lot, and
Mm-hmm.
is partially resolved in the tunnel because everything is dark. All of that gender stuff, everything gets completely muted in the tunnel, and it's not
Mm-hmm.
about that. It's about the love that they have for each other as siblings and nothing more. And that's what reveals, the path for them in that moment. Love is a light in the dark. It takes on new meaning from the original. Very great in my perspective. But ultimately, all this is the same thing. This is all saying, participating in journey, the intention of participating in the journey, which is that part of the chakra journey that we're on now, which is more so in the realm of the fire chakra and the stomach,
Yep.
which is presenting,
Active. Yeah.
it's active, it's presenting the
Yeah.
inertia to continue us on. So
And like archetypically, Sokka and Katara exploring familial love is also part of the hero's journey, in that like you are stronger with love, and
mm,
they gift that to Aang as a lesson that they learn through him not needing to choose because they are there for him. Um,
mm,
I do have a question for you. I know
mm-hmm.
like a lot of people are like, well, it's weird that it was like, you know, not Aang and Katara, but
Yeah,
actually
yeah,
Sokka and, well, okay,
yeah,
so you know, they even made it a queer couple, that Oma and Shu
yeah.
were a queer couple, which I loved. I was like, yeah, why do they need to be a guy and a girl? We never really do, really. But what did you think of changing this from like the Aang moment with Katara?
um it's weird because like they
Because
could
this
have
is
saved
second
it.
season. This is second
Yeah,
season, and they pulled it into the first season.
it was odd. It was almost like they decided to take all of the themes of Omashu and put them into one episode. So they pulled
Mm,
something from the second season. But what's weird is that the story of Omashu is that choice to make, to participate in the journey, to love over everything else. It's the same
and it's the
themes.
middle path too. Like it's like
It's yeah.
the roomy, you know, beyond the field of right and wrong, I'll meet
There's a
you
field,
there.
I'll meet
There's
you
a field, I'll
there.
meet you
Yeah.
there. Right
Yeah.
before beyond right and wrong is there's a field, and I'll meet you there. It's that story. It's the middle path. It's like the third way.
Hmm.
And that is completely lost in this episode.
It is. I would
I don't think
say,
that it's a bad thing, because I also don't think that it would have been appropriate from an archetypical perspective to have Aang go through that. It would
mm-mm.
have been super awkward in this moment because he's not there yet. He's really not. If you tried to put him through it, it would be bad. Be like
Oh
dissonant.
yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. No, he wasn't ready for that. I think that it depends on what they do in the second season. It depends on where they go, because this episode is Into the Dark. That's typically like the themes that happen in this episode are typically what happen in the second iteration of any kind of story, right?
Like
Which
the yeah.
it kind of works
They could
here
have a
because it's in the middle.
repetition of the themes, right? Like they could show those things. Yeah.
That's what yeah, essentially is what I'm saying. Is like if we can revisit some of these things in the second season around the same time,
Yeah.
elaborate on some of them, it will make more sense. I hope they do that. I don't know. I don't know.
I mean, they did get us that moving beyond the field of opposites with Aang saying, I am not alone. I can do this with my friends. It's not
Mhm.
the binary choice of killing you or, you know, running
Right.
away. Like it's not a binary. It's beyond
But then
the false binary.
they're gonna have to up that, which is
Mhm.
the position of and I hate this. Maybe it's just me. It might just be me, but I keep going back to this idea of pacifism and this problem. Like this, it's a problem. It doesn't they don't get there in a good way in the original. Aang hurts a lot of people up until the very end when he's like, I can't kill Ozai. And it doesn't quite flow in the way that it should. But in this series, in the live action, they have a
Sure.
chance to present that earlier on. And I think they have. So if we can
Yeah.
get more of that in the second season, then this will make a lot more sense.
I hope so. Cuz
Yeah.
I do struggle cuz I do think that the traveling Cave of Two Lovers story is really good.
Hmm.
It's framed as very weird in it, but
Hmm.
it's a good underworld journey. They're in the dark and then they find the elixir. Like in that the symbolic sense, it's well
There's
done.
Well, there's also the cave in the third season where Aang creates like a party atmosphere
Yeah,
for all the kids, and that is very symbolic, and they could do
yeah,
something
same
really
thing.
interesting with that. Yeah.
You mean the Kevin Bacon episode of
Footloose. Yeah,
the
that one.
like, learn teaching the kids to dance in the village that is outlined dancing? Sorry. Yes, it
Yeah,
is the
yeah.
Footloose episode.
It is. It is. Then there's other ones I'm probably forgetting, but yeah. So we have time. We have time. We can do this.
Time.
All right, Spirited Away. I love that they called this episode Spirited Away because there's some stuff in here that relates to Miyazaki and
Mhm.
the actual film Spirited Away. I thought this was absolutely brilliant. Again, this is weaving in this idea of like this Asian diaspora that's creating these stories, and they're taking things that they love, like,
Mhm.
the movie Spirited Away,
Miyazaki. Yeah.
Miyazaki. Yeah, so there's the tricksters and identity. There's Kitsune, which we'll talk about, and then there's the Nopera Bow, which is what the Ko is based
Mhm.
on. Um, there's a lot of stuff in myth about tricksters and identity. Uh, this is this is typically it's very like complex in what it offers, and the fact that it can offer like a lot of different themes. It's very much about projection and figuring out like what the truth is. This is a separate from like who am I versus like who do I trust, and then like what is the truth, because you're being fooled, you're being tricked, somebody's purposefully acting against you and trying to fool you into believing something that's not true. So the search for
Yeah.
truth and this is important, and this is also about confronting shadows, but this is
Mhm.
just the start of confronting shadows, which will be resolved more in the next episode. Again, pairs that this is the first of two pairs or two episodes that are a pair. And the Nopera bow, like I said, is a really common, or not common. This is similar to to Ko, which is similar to No Face in Spirited Away, the
Mhm.
Miyazaki film. And these are usually creatures that are in disguise, and there's kind of this adaptation of this creature in uh not only mythology but then in fiction that becomes this creature that they created in the original Avatar, The Last Airbender, which is a face stealer, little
Mhm.
different from its mythological counterpart. Um, but we got there through, through Spirited Away, through No Face, the animated character. And then we also are met with the three-tailed kitsune, which is
Yeah.
really fun one.
Yeah, and this is to me like a fox spirit, because if it's kitsune, it's Japanese and all about sucking life force out of people, which is like, not exactly what we're going for. Or Gumio, which is the Korean version of the nine-tailed fox, or like you gain a tail for every 100 years that you've lived, and are kind of eating the souls of young beautiful men. It's usually women that are fulfilling this. I actually think it's more in line with a celestial fox, which is like a protector, serves the palace of the sun and the moon,
Mm,
which would be the Chinese version of this, and often transcends as part of sort of being tied to being part of a balanced cycle, like a yin and a yang. And
yeah.
so I'm leaning into this being more of a celestial fox,
Mm,
uh, in that they can, go to the spirit realm in and out whenever they want, etc. And
right.
for Sokka specifically, this is a goddess figure that he meets in there, and then he runs into her later on as well. Um, yeah.
I like that.
um,
Yeah, I like that a lot.
yeah, and No Face, Ko, the other sort of plays into this is like that, especially No Face, like i- if you don't deal with your fears, or your fear of pain, or your uh baggage that you carry with you, or in the idea of a shadow that is a garbage bag trailing behind you in a Robert Bly perspective,
Right.
then it becomes bigger. Like No Face, that's literally like he eats all these things and all these people, and he becomes bigger, and he just keeps on consuming. And this is a theme of the show as well, that the consumption just desires more consumption. And um it you have to confront it
Hmm.
and step away from the ties to that fear. I
Hmm.
find it interesting that um it the thing that is so big about the maiden arc phase is that there's a fear of growing up. And
Hmm.
that's actually what Aang talks to Gyatso about, which is like, how do I do this? And he's like, well, I can't tell you how to do this. There's a fear of the individualization. Um,
Hmm.
yeah. And so the main point of the episode is that love is your guide, much like the
Hmm.
Love in the Dark episode. It's repeated so many times in the show. But it's, Joseph Campbell, follow your bliss. It's, George Lucas and Marie Claire Gould, seek your joy, right? It's that same idea that, like, if you are following your heart, your passion, etc., it will, it is the compass that will guide you out of the dark.
Yeah.
Um, Love is strongest in the dark.
Yeah.
The themes are kind of echoed throughout for a bunch of episodes, and then we move on to the next episode, and it's like almost a mirror of the
Mm.
themes of this episode, which is wild.
It is. It is wild. It is. Again, they pair so well together. In fact, I was messing up some of the things that happened between the two
Mm,
when I was mapping Aang's journey. I was like, "Oh, I think the death of the mentor happened here." And like, "No, no, no, it happened here." It was very, very weird because they do
mm-hmm,
intermix, and there's also like a dream like element that's happening with the Spirited
mm-hmm.
Away and whatnot. But yeah, a lot of stuff is resolved here. This episode 6, Masks, it's about shadows and scars. We see Zuko's flashback with his fight against his father in this
Mhm.
episode. And then we also, by the end of it, we get the death of the mentor, which is Gyatso leaving Aang, leaving him
Permanently.
alone permanently. Yes.
Mhm.
So
Is
it
really tied into stepping into the hero phase for him
yeah.
personally.
Hmm.
And Zuko choosing to disobey his, like, the rule that he can't go back into Fire Nation, even though he's in a mask, right?
Yeah.
The mask is who he truly is, as
That's
Iroh
what
says.
yeah, that's what Ira says at the end of it on the narration at the end of the episode. Yeah.
Mhm.
Tells us everything we need to know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the moral of this story is the mask was who he was all along. He's actually this good person if you just give him this chance. Um, you know, Aang goes in and tries to find Roku. Um, he finds that the Fire Nation doesn't respect him and is finds the Fire Lord as the spiritual leader, not the Avatar, and he's like, "Wait, what? Where's my help?" Roku repeats again that you have to choose your own path. We're all different. Don't listen to Kyoshi. She's just like that.
Hmm. Right.
Um, and we really see quite heavily how Ozai treats his kids as the sorceress,
Yeah.
right? Really, really heavily. Like he
He
harms Zuko, but also harms Azula by doing it.
well, yeah, he consumes his kids. I mean, he's like
It's
a
like the
what's
House of Atreus,
right.
right? Like the theme of consuming your own kids,
Kronos.
Kronos, like
Yeah.
that whole theme of like I'm going to feed my children to other people or I'm going to eat my own children.
Right.
Um
For power.
for power or just cuz uh well, I mean, and this is that transgenerational ethics. Whenever we don't think about the future for our children and our children's children, we are consuming their future.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
He's not thinking about a future for them. He's only thinking about himself and what they can bring to him. That's the sorceress archetype right there.
Yeah.
Um, you know, Aang is dealing with the chance of failure and losing people, but he chooses to go off on his own and he leaves Appa behind. And it's so interesting. He's like, "No, Appa, I gotta go.
Yeah, you can't come with me this time.
Nope,
Yeah.
gotta leave the village." Right?
Yeah.
And he's really struggling with what is expected of him. He gets captured and he gets saved by a protector, and they both Zuko and him reverse roles
Yeah.
a lot, and they end up being married in a way, right? A
Mhm.
union of sorts that happens. This is a teamwork, right? Like they're kind of like team Avatar for a moment with the blue spirit and him.
Mhm.
Um and he's struggling, but he sees the reflection of what Zuko says to him in that moment and says, I'm struggling with what everyone expects me to be too. And he sees that in the predator and then consumes it. And this is when he fully takes on that thing and says, maybe you don't have to be like the other firebenders. Like I don't have to be like the other avatars.
Exactly.
Oh,
Yeah.
so good. And yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
um Zuko going off on his own, he fully steps into being individuated from
Mhm.
his family.
Yeah. Yeah. There's the Aang's journey at this point is he is presented with a contradiction of everything he knows to be true, which is that his friends are powerful and then he's saved by an enemy. So it's like
Yeah.
he has to be faced with that conflict. And he faces it very well because as from the innocence of where he is in his journey, the innocence of a child, the innocence of, the nomadic life that he has
Mhm.
had, being gone for so long, he accepts that quite immediately. But then he has to contend with it because all of his mentors have been telling him, or not all of them, but his mentors have been telling him different things. So that's when
Mhm.
he has to take these two truths that seem contradictory and he has to combine them and
A
transcend
moment of
the binary.
alchemical union, a union of opposites where suddenly you transcend your former self and are joined together with all of these disparate ideas and become a new version of yourself with a piece of information with that.
Gasp.
Oh,
Gasp.
no, it's really cool.
It
I mean,
is
it's done
really
really
cool.
well. And we get a full
Oh
scene
yeah.
where he's like, oh, wait, maybe if you had compassion, that'd be cool.
Oh goodness.
Compassion being often the elixir.
Yeah. The Kylo Ren
Compassion for
is
us
coming
after.
out. Yeah. Oh, love
Yeah.
it. I love it. All right. The North. The last couple of episodes paired. Okay, this is so interesting. The North presents themes of isolation, detachment, and the theme of healing is introduced but not yet resolved. And all these are resolved in the last episode. I don't want to say these are resolved in this one, but healing specifically is introduced and resolved in different ones. But the one of the things that in terms of the healing theme is presented that the healer Katara is told that she has to practice with the healers, the women of this community. And the healer teaches Katara that you must learn what it means to feel pain and then take that pain away.
Oh, I
And
love
then
that.
yeah, this is very much a big part of what becomes not only a big theme of these two episodes, but it will be a big theme of the entire show, the entire arc of the show.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so glad that they put this scene in there. And then Karuk's lesson, the avatar, the previous water avatar, he says to Aang that the avatar must walk alone or else your loved ones will suffer. He says it's very similar to Bumi's lesson. This is similar to Kyoshi's lesson. He also says that you know, you have to bear the burden alone. Like you can't be with your friends all the time. They're not going to save you all the time. You have to be alone. So this is all presenting this idea, this binary, what I like to call between isolation and detachment, which
Mm-hmm.
look like the same thing, but they're not the same thing. Katara experiences this because she has to stand up, uh, for herself without help from her friends and her fight to show that she is worthy of being a warrior. And there's some elements of isolation that come into this with the idea that the Northern Water Tribe has this idea of controlling women's power
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to using it, as opposed to like embracing women's power of healing. They are controlling it by keeping them isolated in their own practices. This is,
Mm-hmm.
of course, a wild power. A lot of like Estes talks a lot about this.
We
The
get the magical girl transformation sequence in that her hair gets whipped out from her and she becomes a wild woman, i.e., comfortable with her own power, which is a big
Yeah.
hero's journey thing and a heroine's journey thing specifically in that when you are finally able to embrace your own power, like you become more wild in it.
Yeah, and her hair really is wild in that particular thing. It's like frizzy and it is
Mm-hmm.
very wild woman. And that power comes from, and this is from a symbolic point of view, this comes from the sex organs. This comes from the water chakra. This is all within that same kind of the water element showing through that symbolism. We also have Azula in this episode too, that also shows her true power in that moment when she finally conjures the lightning to
Mm-hmm.
prove how powerful she is. Again, wild woman power, but it's been fermenting in isolation. She has been
Mm-hmm.
practicing this without her friends. You know, there's that beautiful
They're
scene where
asleep. Yeah.
they're asleep. Yeah, it's I love that scene. I think
Yeah.
it shows so much in such a small amount of time. But this has been a fermenting power in isolation. So I think the a big theme, not the only one, but a big theme they have in this episode is that isolation makes us more ruthless against outsiders. But detachment, the practice of detachment will lead to more intimacy. And the key difference between these two things is the awareness of what's actually
Mm.
happening. it's a wisdom that you get from being aware, and then that allows you to either move into ruthlessness or move into more intimacy, which is what we're going to get into in the final episode. It shows us who is hurting from being isolated versus who is more powerful because of their detachment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
Yeah.
from a hero archetype perspective, Sokka and Yue, like they get their big love versus duty
Yes.
hero like conversation. And this plays really, it's mirrored in the last episode, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Which is great.
It is great. It is great. Yeah. So very much water-centric, woman-centric episode. Even
Yeah,
though you have
episode.
like Karuk and Aang is a big part of it, you still have a very like feminine energy coming through.
Yeah.
So the last episode is kind of this resolution between those themes, but it also introduces some more. We get the moon and the tides, which is very literal. We get isolation versus detachment that is resolved. The consequences, all of this whole journey, Aang has been told that he has a responsibility. There's going to be consequences. We see those consequences, and then we have a resolution and the power of healing. And Momo, which, honestly, like I was shocked they did this. Like I had read about it online before I got to that last episode, and it still impacted me. It was shocking that they did that to Momo, and just the way that he was animated in that scene. I was like, wow, this is such an innocent little body of life, and they, hurt him. How could they? But it was beautiful that they used that was not like it was done in a way that was showing us the power of healing as compared to Koizilla.
Yeah, which is
Which was
destruction.
destruction. Yeah. The
Yeah.
power of water can be both healing and destructive. And of course, so we get the moon stuff, the moon cycles. Obviously, moon cycles are connected to menstruation, the ebb and flow of life.
Life, death, life, right?
Life,
Because
death,
that's you
life. Yeah.
go through that symbol. And so the balance is that you're in the cycle endlessly. And if you stop the cycle, then you're
Yeah.
out of balance. And I like the use of a kaiju in this
Oh,
because
yeah.
they're always nature fighting back when humanity has broken something.
Mhm.
You know,
Oh,
that's
yeah.
and it transcends humanness.
Yeah. And there is a cool thing about like this kind of visual of the kaiju, like the Koizilla, as people have called it. Even one of our friends who worked on the visuals for this, she
That
called
was
it
what they called it.
yeah,
That's
she
so
called it
cute.
Koizilla. I was like, that's adorable. But yeah, one of the visual for this monstrosity that it is has a bunch of things going on. But one of the things I initially thought was like it looks like Iron Man because the glow that's coming from its chest, it has like that exact same color as what would power the Iron Man suit. So it has
Right.
that kind of like that Western Avengers superhero stuff. But that's also the air chakra. Like the heart is where the air chakra is, right?
That's so
So
cool.
Aang is sitting in his like air chakra. He's sitting within his own, heart, his own origin within this monster. Um, and also you get kind of the feminine aspect that's acting as like a foil to Koizilla. The Koizilla is like more masculine archetype here, but then you have like the more feminine, which is Yue, who is she's not sacrificing herself, she's transcending. She is sacrificing her human body, but she is still like she is like always has been destined to be the moon, because her name literally
Mhm.
means moon. Um, but she's also, she's like this feminine mother archetype, and she does reach she reaches this transcendence, but she was always destined for this transcendence. So it's the power of healing versus the power of destruction and all of that going on.
She is also a divine child, I should probably say.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
because she was touched by the moon spirit when she was a child, or she would have died, and it basically set her on a path that she only had this choice.
Hmm.
Eventually it would happen to her. Yeah. I'm sad
Yeah.
we didn't actually get to see her as like in the cartoon. I think we kind of see her as the moon, sort of.
We also see it in the second season, so there's a chance she might come back because she was a
That would be, I mean,
spirit.
I think it's important that Sokka realizes that she is the moon now.
Yeah. Well, there's a moment where she says to Sokka, "That's not Aang anymore."
Right,
And
right,
that's
right.
I don't
Yeah.
remember that being in the original, but yeah, there is no Aang anymore. So she
Mhm.
actually puts it in his mind that Aang is gone,
Yeah.
and this is only the spirit of the moon that is now, or the spirit of
The
the
spirit
ocean,
ocean. Yeah.
yeah, that is taking over. So it's like there's a lot of stuff going on there with the expectation of what she has to do and what she thinks it is. She thinks she's going to lose herself. And then once it, she realizes she won't be losing herself, she'll be transcending herself, right? Which is the moment where she does allow herself to become one with it. So
I do want to point out that momentarily Aang becomes a bully, even unintentionally. No,
I
no, no.
love
I mean,
it.
he's a hero because he becomes worse than his enemy,
Yeah. No, for sure, for
right?
sure. Yeah, he does a
Um,
lot of destruction for unnecessarily so.
unnecessarily so, but whatever.
So funny.
He was also mad, I think, too, right? Like, and
Mhm.
he just let the koi ocean koi like live through him, and he's like, yeah, let's go for this ride. um
Exactly.
Sokka has like some of the best stuff in this episode, and
Yeah.
that like his resolution between love and duty from a hero's perspective is tied up in the moment when he's speaking with the like leader of the Northern Water tribe, and he says like, when in a moment she, or Yue, must have been scared. You were there for her. You don't have to be a warrior to be a hero. Literally, like
Mm.
textually, they tell us what's happening. Like
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
like I know it's annoying when like, hey, the subtext, but like honestly, we've gotten to a point with media literacy where subtext is like for the weak, apparently, because like George Lucas famously said that, like, you actually have to tell people, like, hey, the point is that you can be there and comfort people and still be a hero. You can be compassionate, you can love people and still be a hero. Like, that's, the point, trademark.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, totally.
Zuko follows his own path. He's a bully, he's a hero, he's trying to figure out this new hero thing. But uh, you know, eventually he leaves and he's like really exhausted. He's like, I'm tired. And
He's
and
also
yeah,
he also wears another mask in this episode
yeah,
by
he
wearing
does.
white. Yeah.
Yeah,
He's
yeah,
blending into his surroundings, but it's symbolically like he can't escape this like goodness that's already
yeah.
working its way through him.
Well, like we talked about a lot about this, that often once you've experienced an alchemical union, once you experience your apotheosis, which he did to
Mhm,
transform from like maiden to hero,
mhm.
you're reborn as a baby. Or you're a baby version of yourself, and so he's stumbling a lot because he doesn't quite know what his place is
Mm,
in the world again, like in this new form where he's actually maybe not the man his dad wanted him to be.
mhm. Yeah, exactly.
right? And so it's interesting because I don't 100% know where they're going to go with season
Mm,
2, right? Because of the things they pulled out of season 2 into season 1 and like what they're going to do. But I'm excited to see how they play out
yeah.
his journey. Again, everybody might revert a little bit, like that
Hmm.
often happens. And I
I
love
want
that
it
they
to
talked
happen.
about water being the element of change because
Hmm.
that's also thematically so important with Zuko's healing proposal and also with Aang's healing later on from a story
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah, I think that water is a really good element to start with to show Aang's struggle with mastering the other elements. I think that showing that he got water, he gets water, water's easy for him at the
I
beginning of the
suspect that a
second season.
montage, like literally,
Yeah,
like water.
exactly.
You
Yeah.
won't even have to
Like, oh
try.
yeah, I got water. And then like they start earth or fire or whatever one they want to tackle next and then they're like he can't or both, he can't do it. And it's like that's going to show
That's the
his
conflict, really. Like
that's his
deciding to
conflict.
not
Yeah.
show water is
Hmm.
fine with me because they can
Yeah.
literally be like, and you're a water better now because like it was off screen or like a little montage and like he's just that's not interesting. The interest is in the struggle. The interest is in
Yes.
the conflict. The interest is in, him trying to figure out his place with these other elements that are more oppositional to him, which is season 2 and season 3.
Yeah, he never really had a reason to struggle with water. He doesn't have a thematic reason to struggle with it. He doesn't have a character reason to struggle with it. He
Mm-hmm.
and Katara are very close. They're the closest ones. Like it's not yeah, it wouldn't have presented anything interesting to show him learning water, which is, why the pirates had to be tossed out of the storyline because they weren't interesting. But yeah,
Yeah. I
yeah.
kind of hope
So
we get the vine benders though.
oh,
I
heck yeah. That's one of
I
my favorite parts of
I
the entire
I,
show.
I enjoy that.
The
And
swamp
also like
guys, oh,
swamp guides,
with their
yeah.
country accents. I'm like, I don't think they're gonna do it, but I also hope that they do it. Like, it would be amazing. But
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like all of that Southern
And we get like
American
bossing
stuff.
say stuff
Oh
too,
yeah,
which
we're
I don't know,
gonna
there's
get a
lots
lot
of
of
stuff
boxing.
I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, I don't want to like focus on too much in terms of like I hope this, I hope that, because I don't want to like I want to manage my own expectations and not and just really focus on like allowing whatever they're doing to speak to me because that's what I did with this season and
Yeah.
I enjoyed the heck out of it and
What
I don't have like anything
surprised
negative.
you the most about like the episodes and how they presented?
Hmm. The directness, I guess, because I mean that we
Mm-hmm.
have been talking about it, but honestly, when they were able to summarize things or when characters said something really straightforward, like even that little moment with Zuko and Iroh, whenever Iroh was like, "So what's the plan?" and Zuko's like, "I'm taking back my position," and da da da, and Iroh says, "So no plan." And he's like, "I'm working on it, Uncle." Like it was in the trailer too, but it was
Yeah.
just so perfectly executed. It tells us so much in a short amount of time. I guess you know that's the most impressive thing to me for this series and what they've done is just to
Yeah.
be able to combine all of that. That was like wow. What was for you?
Um, the solid execution of thematically consistent uh like symbolism
Yeah.
and archetypes that align with both where the characters and the actors that are playing them it makes sense,
Hmm.
right? Because that's a struggle with using real people versus animation,
Oh, 100%.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so choosing to allow a time jump and having Gordon grow up
Hmm.
helps a lot from archetypically because again he's going to be a hero, he's going to be struggling with emotions and the symbolic puberty he will be in.
Yeah.
Right. And to have that happen at too young an age for Gordon is not fair. And also for the character, it makes no sense. And so the fact
Mhm.
that they moved away from using the Cave of Two Lovers thematically in this story makes complete sense, so that they can lay the groundwork later more successfully for a romantic shift for Aang.
Mhm.
And I believe that it will be more successful if they're, I mean, you and I both believe that they're going to be following the original
Canon.
storyline,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Which I mean, I don't think they're
But
going to veer from it at all.
yeah, I don't think so either. But if we think about it in terms of the where he's gonna be as Gordon his age, I mean, he'll be probably 18
By
by
the
the
time the
time.
everything ends, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like,
Hmm.
okay, well, we're getting into adulthood, we're getting into, it's a more mature story at that point, which makes sense with like the original did deal with like heavy concepts by the third season. You're dealing
Hmm.
with more like, I can't kill Ozai, like, what do I do? I can't take his life. Well, you're dealing with more heavier stuff. Like, so it makes sense that the characters are, being played by actors who are growing through this story. And yeah, it's
It's
impressive.
understanding the medium that they're working with
Yeah.
and adapting
Yeah.
to that. What are we talking about? Adapting it so that it works with the elements that they're given. Because
Exactly.
living humans are different than cartoons, right?
Mhm,
You don't
mhm.
have stretch and squash, which is like when Sokka becomes like a noodle. You don't have stretch and squash, which is a term used to denote when an animated character kind of becomes, like a noodle, or like a stretchy thing, or squishes really small. And you can't do that to humans.
Yeah, you can't do crazy mushroom cloud, thing where Sokka, like, does
The
the crazy woo
woo
thing when
cactus
yeah,
juice. Like,
cactus juice
you
stuff,
can't
yeah.
do that with humans, right? So you have to understand the medium that you're working with and what you're able to tell with physical people.
Yeah.
And I do think that, like, adapting it in a way that was more serious, although Sokka still gets like the comedic elements, and I know that him and Toph will probably have great comedic elements, and there'll still be
Yeah.
comedy.
Yeah, yeah.
Makes me really happy. I also applaud the creators for basically making the crew Team Avatar from the beginning, because that chemistry will build on each other as they are more comfortable with each other.
Yeah.
And them themselves, when they get to the satisfying moments when they're all together and working together and all of that, like, it, it will be so good.
Yeah, it will. It will. I love their chemistry. Their chemistry is insane. Like, I'm glad they threw in the actress that plays Azula as well, because
Hmm.
that you just know that there's going to be some awesome stuff coming for those characters. All right, I just want to talk about this, and then we can kind of wrap it up. The extra little theme here that's going on through the whole entire first season, it's going to be in the background of the next two seasons as well, is the symbolism of the lotus. We talked about how chakras are the lotus, but there is this, um if you know the original, that's kind of come with the White Lotus uh group, the older men who are basically, would you call them, sages, or sorcerers, or not sorcerers, but
They're all
they're
mages,
they're all
because
mages,
they're
right?
all experts in their own particular whatever they do. Like, we have the sword
Hmm.
expert, we have the fire bending expert, we have the water bend, like, we have all these, like, basically former mentors of Team Avatar who have decided to stick around and still play a role in the world. They're the Gandalfs of the world, who have turned from Gandalf the Gray to Gandalf the White.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Those
So
are the
they're
mages,
yeah, those are the mages. We have
archetypically.
that. It's coming. Obviously the tile, the post shot, I think called Poshite. I can't remember the Iroh picks up in the series. It's the only inclination that we have of that so far, but we know it's going to happen, and that is signifying to us as the audience that this is the goal. This is the whole goal of the entire story. This is where we're going. Confucius says, that the lotus is such a beautiful symbol because from the mud, it
Yeah.
transcends, and it transcends unstained. It comes from the mud, but it's unstained, which just means that from such a terrible world, with all of these systemic problems, with all of these tyrants, with all of these terrible things that happen, even in the mud of all of this destruction, we can still bloom something beautiful and something that is
Mm-hmm.
unstained from that mud, something that is unconnected from that mud. So
It's, again, the transgenerational ethics in that, like, you can move past the today into a more beautiful tomorrow. You can have
mhm,
hope for a better tomorrow.
yeah, yeah. And it's also representative of the goddess getting back to this because we know what happens. It's getting back to this idea of uh nurturance, I don't this is I'm talking about it not in a new age sense. I'm talking about it, in more of a Hindu or, you know, Buddhism sense, that the lotus is more of a feminine archetype as opposed to masculine archetype, and that sitting on the lotus, a lot of characters in this mythology sit on the lotus. And like I said, the lotus is also the chakras, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
symbolized uh as lotuses, and it's a blooming, and it is a feminine symbol of uh not only change but a new beginning.
Mm-hmm.
It's starting over. So that's the goal of this story. That's where we're getting uh lots of feminine archetypal energy going on. It's just I love it. I love these kinds of stories. I think it's so exciting. Um and I'm excited to kind of map the whole thing once it's all out.
I feel like we've given so much food for people to think about.
Oh my god. Yeah, yeah, well, and we could continue to talk about it if we wanted to, but we have exhausted the time, but we will talk about it again. I think that, you know, if people are interested in certain concepts, we probably will fill the time between this season and the next,
How long do you think it's going to take
perhaps.
them to do season 2? Because they're going to film season 2 and 3 at the same time.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Like, I want them to take a long time on it because I want it to be like tight, but I don't know. I don't know. I trust them so far. So
Yeah.
if it takes 2 years, that would be ideal. If it takes 3 or 4 years, I will gladly wait.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
like whatever they do from a filming perspective, like we'll get it later because of, the animation and different things like that that
mhm,
has to happen with it.
mhm.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I it's interesting. I know a lot of people speculated like, "Oh my God, the original creators were so mad at them when they left." But like they were also offered their movie deal, which I think they
Yes.
realized they couldn't do both.
Yeah, I think that there's very obvious yeah, explanations there that you can say. It's not I don't think it was a as controversial as people want to say it was. I think it was very obvious that they wanted to focus on the animation, that their crew was more familiar with
Hmm.
animation. I think that makes sense. Um
Different medium.
Clearly, yeah, different medium. And clearly the people who have it now like stayed true to the original story. I mean, all of the rumors about
Hmm.
them wanting to change stuff was clearly not true. It's fascinating how when it all came out,
Yeah.
people were still trying to say, "Oh, this difference means that they don't care about the original." And it's like, okay, this is the closest we could get with 8 episodes.
I I really struggle with like speculation YouTube about like
Yeah,
productions.
me too. Well, after
Like,
we experienced Tross, I think that we both have a different kind
yeah,
of takeaway from all of that. You
like
don't know, you never
production
know.
speculation is like I struggle with it. It's hard. You get into this trap of like what is going wrong or what is, but like in some ways, I've talked about this. Every show, every movie that gets given to us is a friggin' miracle.
Yeah,
Any show that we get to actually see, any movie that we actually get to see, the fact that we got to see it is a
it's a
miracle.
miracle. Yeah. Yeah, we've said it before. We've said this before. It is. It's a logistical like nightmare to try to produce a film. It's a logistical nightmare to try to tell a story with multiple people. It,
Hmm.
it is a miracle that these get made, and we are lucky to have them. We're lucky to be able to talk about them, and we're lucky to have them at such high quality as this.
This
Like,
is crazy high quality.
yeah, yeah. I that's what I like to focus on. And even like I think, I had some issues here and there, but I think ultimately there was so much mythic food to chew on, and there was so much
Mhm.
beautiful visuals and exciting parts of it that were just I was just eating it up, and I was like, well, I don't even care about
Yeah.
some of the things that maybe didn't work exactly how I wanted it to because it didn't matter. So
I think,
yeah.
yeah. I know I don't want to speculate too much, but I actually think archetypically it will make more sense next season if we get more of Katara's rage, which would fix some of my problems with this season.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think it'll make more sense in the middle
Yeah.
chapter. In the middle chapter, which is typically the darker chapter. So
Darker chapter, darker middle chapter.
you just
I'm
make that up.
excited.
I'm excited too. I'm glad they renewed it for both the
Ugh,
like the full thing. They've made it
sigh
so
of
much.
relief.
Yeah,
Yeah.
super sigh of relief. Don't have to do the Willow thing again. But yeah, yeah, no, this is great.
Cry.
So I guess we can wrap it up. We talked a long time about this. There's still probably more to talk about. I'm so glad you listened to this. Obviously, you know where to find me if you're listening to this. Right, Claire, just like remind them where they can find you.
Oh, sure. I'm Marie Claire Gould, and I am the host of What the Force podcast. And so you can find that wherever podcasts are found and YouTube. I'm also, some of the stuff I do is on What the Fiction, which is also a podcast and also on YouTube. And if you really, really want to follow me directly, I'm Marie C. Gould on all social medias. So,
Yep. And I am at black_TYM on Twitter, my personal, and then just for the YouTube stuff, you can find me at wit_folly on Twitter. And obviously my wit and folly YouTube channel. Thanks so much for listening. Uh See you some other time. Cheers.
cheers.